There are some things human beings aren't meant to know, and it's the sworn duty of the SCP Foundation to discover and contain such information. But sometimes knowledge is discovered that shakes even the Foundation itself to its very core. One such discovery occurred on April 28, 2016. That night, SCP-2935 made itself known to the Foundation personnel. To this day, the exact nature of SCP-2935 is a mystery that even the Foundation's brightest minds can't completely understand. Everything we know about SCP-2935 today comes from 3 doomed missions to the anomalous zone's interior. This is the story of those infamous expeditions. The nightmare began around 5 a.m. when SCP Foundation Site-81 in Bloomingdale, Indiana, intercepted a distorted radio signal. Communications personnel at the site traced this strange signal back to the unincorporated area of Joppa, Indiana, near U.S. Interstate 70. As is Foundation policy, a team of field agents were dispatched to the location in order to determine what they were dealing with. However, rather than finding anything that could logically produce such a signal, they instead discovered a long-abandoned cemetery. The most recent death on any of the tombstones was recorded as being over 100 years ago, all the way back in 1908. On further investigation, the Foundation discovered an unmapped limestone cave opening beneath the cemetery, and when they sent a drone into the depths of the cave, it appeared to quickly exit out the other side of the cave. But something wasn't right. The area that the drone was observing appeared consistent with the landscape from which it entered, but now it looked somehow grayer. It lacked the color of life of the place it just come from. The grass was dead, there were no trees, no shrubs, no animals or birds in the sky. They weren't looking at our world, they were looking at a strange reflection of our world on the other side of the cave. In fact, it wasn't a cave at all, it was a passageway between 2 dimensions. It was SCP-2935. Just then, they were able to unscramble the distorted transmission they'd been receiving. It went as follows. This is an automated emergency broadcast from the SCP Foundation and your national government. One or more of our sites is experiencing a communication breakdown, likely due to a containment breach of unknown magnitude. All citizens are ordered to stay in their homes as containment teams work to secure the breach. This message will broadcast from April 20th, 2016 until… At that point, the message would cut and repeat, as it had for 8 straight days. The message source? Site-81, but not this Site-81. The SCP Foundation was receiving an emergency distress signal from themselves in another dimension, a bizarre event that even the Foundation had never experienced before. Field agents were terrified by the implications of what they just heard and contacted Site-81 Command to request additional units. The Foundation wished to fully understand this anomaly as quickly as possible due to the potential threat it could pose toward the Foundation, so they dispatched Mobile Task Force Epsilon 13, codenamed Manifest Destiny, to perform the first of 3 manned missions into the heart of the anomalous zone. The first exploratory mission into SCP-2935 was codenamed Gauntlet and consisted of a 4-man team fitted with full hazmat suits and direct video and audio links to Mission Command. The team was led by a field operative known only as Agent Juno. His subordinates were Agents Kale, Devon, and Underwood. Their directive was to gather samples and survey the area positioned directly around the insertion point, meaning the other cave mouth of SCP-2935. The mission only lasted about an hour, but what they saw in there would stay with these men for the rest of their lives. After a 15-minute trek through the cave, Manifest Destiny arrived in the mirror dimension, where they were struck by the eerie silence of a place that seemed identical and yet so different from their home dimension. The first observation they made was the total absence of all living vegetation. Trees, grass, weeds, everything, it was all dead. On orders from their superiors back in the original dimension, that we'll refer to from here on as Dimension Prime, Manifest Destiny headed deeper into the mirror dimension of SCP-2935. They traveled 2 kilometers without detecting a single sign of plant or animal life, not even insects. Eventually, they came upon a farmhouse with 2 cars parked outside. With authorization from Command, Manifest Destiny breached the house and headed inside. Agent Kale confirmed that there was still power flowing to the building, as the lighting appeared to work just fine, but they came upon a horrifying discovery in the house's dining room. 3 adult corpses, 2 female, 1 male, were seated at the table. A 4th corpse, that of a male child, was sprawled out on the ground nearby. As if the death of what looked to be an entire family wasn't awful enough, the Manifest Destiny team noticed a number of other alarming details. There were no signs of decomposition on the bodies, nor did there appear to be any obvious cause of death. The family's last meal was still on the table: chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. While the food looked cold and stale, there was no evidence of rot or spoiling. The team found an open newspaper dated April 19, 2016, illustrating that the family may have died a full 8 days before the discovery. In Dimension Prime, decay would already be very well underway by that point, yet here there wasn't even a smell. Instead, everything was just covered in a thin layer of dust. Command requested that Manifest Destiny collect samples of the food as well as hair, skin, and fluids from the corpses for further study. Small electronics like smartphones were also taken from the bodies. Agent Devon turned on the television in the living room and found that while most stations were now running test signals, the shopping channel was still live. Well, the feed was live at least. Both hosts sat in front of the cameras dead, but perfectly preserved. The date on the screen read April 28, 2016. Suggesting that the times of Dimension Prime and Mirror Dimension were exactly the same. In fact, everything seemed the same, the only difference between the two dimensions being that some kind of mysterious apocalyptic event had occurred in the last 8 days in SCP-2935's Mirror Dimension, but exactly what had happened or how remained a mystery. When Manifest Destiny exited the farmhouse, they once again remarked on the lack of all signs of life around them. At this point, the team returned to the insertion point of SCP-2935, but were instructed to remain in the Mirror Dimension while additional units joined them inside. Manifest Destiny swelled to 16 members, with the notable addition of Agent Roy as the new commanding field officer. The team split into 2 groups of 8, and Agent Roy and his men infiltrated the Mirror Dimension Site-81, while Agent Juno's detachment attempted to access the base's off-site deep storage servers. This second expedition was codenamed Overland, and led the Foundation's field agents even deeper into the terrifying mystery of SCP-2935. Accessing the site was easy for Roy's detachment. It seemed there were relatively few cars on the road at the time of the mysterious extinction event. In the distance, fire still smoldered in the wreckage of planes that looked to have just dropped out of the sky. Agent Roy and his team, like all SCP Foundation personnel, were fitted with vitals trackers, and they assumed that the distress signal that started this whole thing could have been triggered by the deaths of every member of the Foundation at once in the Mirror Universe. Once inside Site-81, they realized that the assumption was probably right. Going door to door in the administrative wing, they found the perfectly preserved corpses of everyone they knew to be stationed there in Dimension Prime. People who were without a doubt still alive in their universe. Samples from the corpses that the Foundation would later study even confirmed the reason that the bodies were perfectly preserved. The corpses had experienced complete and sudden death on a cellular level, and even the bacteria that would typically take part in the decomposition process had died with it. In SCP-2935, death was total and absolute, across all types of life forms. As Agent Roy's team ventured further into the bowels of Site-81, they made another unsettling discovery: their own corpses, in roughly the same spots they'd been inside Dimension Prime Site-81 8 days prior. Some of the Foundation's top scientists, including the esteemed Dr. Bright, were also found dead inside the facility. In an attempt to see just how far this unexplained phenomenon stretched, Agent Roy's team decided to inspect the containment cells, where they found that all the Mirror Universe's SCPs, including SCP-2996, were dead. In his desperation to find some kind of exception to the extinction event, Agent Roy revealed a terrifying secret to the rest of his team. SCP-682, the immortal misanthropic lizard and one of the deadliest creatures known to the SCP Foundation, was contained at this very facility right below them. Could it have something to do with what was going on here? They descended into the containment facility to discover an even more unsettling truth. SCP-682, the unkillable anomaly, floated dead in its tank. Death truly made no exceptions within SCP-2935. Agent Roy's team left the site and rendezvoused with Agent Juno's team to send their research back to Dimension Prime using automated drones. Both teams remained in the Mirror Dimension for another manned operation codenamed 19. They had no idea it would be their final mission. As they descended deeper into the facility, passing more dead SCPs, they discovered one final clue. Based on the activity of the Foundation servers, the event occurred at roughly 3 a.m. While underground in SCP-2935 Site-81, the team accidentally activated the base's on-site nuclear weapon, a failsafe meant to be detonated in the case of an emergency containment breach. Due to the base's failsafe protocols, every member of the Manifest Destiny team was locked and sealed inside Site-81. They, along with everything else, were incinerated in the nuclear blast. Once again, the mirror universe inside of SCP-2935 was lifeless. But that isn't where it ends. When the automated drones returned out of the SCP-2935 cave to the field operations in Dimension Prime, they were in for their own horrifying discovery. None of the footage or information gathered from SCP-2935 illuminated how or why the extinction event occurred. Everyone and everything simply dropped dead at the exact same moment. Nobody was aware, nobody was prepared. Death came suddenly and silently, and none were spared. All the Foundation on Dimension Prime were left with was a message from one of the agents from Manifest Destiny, Agent Keller. His final message was, "I don't have any answers. I don't think there are any. I'll do this one thing and hope that fixes it. Seal it shut. You've got to lock it in here with us. I'm sorry." The Foundation were at first confused by this until they discovered a final encrypted audio log buried in the files recovered from the Mirror Universe's Site-81. It was a message from Keller himself, but not the Keller from Universe Prime. In this message, Keller described the Foundation in the Mirror Universe receiving the exact same distorted transmission that they did a few days earlier from a cave in Joppa. When he and the others were dispatched inside, they discovered the same lifeless post-extinction event world that was now so familiar to the Foundation command. But there was a key difference. This wasn't the mirror dimension they'd just been studying, but a third, entirely different dimension. In his haunting final words, Mirror Dimension Keller admits that whatever caused the event in that third dimension, an entity in that mirror dimension Keller believed this was the specter of death itself and had followed him back into his world, and history had repeated itself. SCP-2935 was the passageway through which absolute death could pass from dimension to dimension, and our dimension was the next in line. The deaths of Manifest Destiny may have saved our entire universe, as anyone passing back through the cave had the potential to bring death itself back with them. The Foundation decided in the end to follow Keller's advice. They sealed the entrance to SCP-2935 with concrete and now kept it under constant watch, since what waits behind the barrier is an entity even they have no power to stop if it ever got through. After all, it had killed them all before, or at least another version of them. What's one more dimension on the pile? Why, it may now just seem like a simple slab of concrete under an abandoned cemetery. This is why SCP-2935 might be the most dangerous SCP of all.
Some say that SCP-2102 was a mistake, an abomination created by an accident of medical science. Maybe those people are right. Maybe there's much more to it than that. Either way, they don't know the full story. How could they? They weren't there. They weren't there all the way back in 1972. But Dr. Pavel Zukal was. The earliest moments, the events that directly preceded SCP-2102's creation began on March 2nd. The wind was carrying an unforgiving, freezing bite with it as Zukal made his way to the Institute of Experimental Medicine, ZISAV, in Czechoslovakia. With the Cold War between the USSR and the United States underway, there was already an air of secrecy on both sides. Espionage and intelligence-gathering operations were rampant, bringing with them paranoia and distrust. There was no way of knowing if someone was a double agent, leaking information to the West. But while the governments of Russia, America, and their various respective allies and enemies scrambled for control and amassed obscene quantities of nuclear arms in secret, there were even more cogs turning, hidden in the deepest, darkest shadows. The SCP Foundation's long-standing rivalry with various other groups of interest was well known among any with a high enough security clearance. Most of these groups were radicals or outliers, despite possessing knowledge of anomalies or even being directly linked to them. A lot of GOIs were independent of any world government. But for decades, the Foundation had been aware of a directly competing establishment, effectively a parallel of their own organization on the other side of the globe. They were known as GRU Division P, a USSR equivalent of the SCP Foundation themselves. It is unclear based on what was recovered from Dr. Zukal's personal diary if he had been directly scouted by GRU Division P for their project in Czechoslovakia. Given the air of secrecy engulfing the USSR at the time, it is possible that Pavel himself had no inclination that Division P was even involved in the project, due to take place at the Institute of Experimental Medicine. He might have suspected, but with no way of knowing for sure. Similarly, there was no way Zukal could have known where the project would lead, what he would have a hand in creating. The initial few weeks after his arrival at the Institute were rocky, to say the least. Zukal, along with a team of scientists and technicians working on orders direct from Moscow, had to contend with unreliable equipment and difficulty getting electricity to power the project. Eventually, after clearing those initial hurdles, testing could begin. But what was the goal of this mysterious project? Well, through Zukal, GRU Division P and the Kremlin were chasing something the scientific world has been trying to accomplish for decades. Something that could change the very landscape of not only the Cold War, but the entirety of modern medicine, the secrets of cellular regeneration. Unlocking that would, in theory, enable them to create the world's very first unkillable super soldier. And hey, it definitely wouldn't be the craziest secret operation carried out by a world superpower during the Cold War. The CIA spent millions turning a cat into a listening device and training it to infiltrate enemy headquarters. This so-called acoustic kitty was struck and killed by a random van during its first mission. Compared to that, a cell-regenerating super soldier was positively sensible. With a worldwide nuclear arms race already underway, perhaps the project's ultimate goal was to produce an entire army of these self-regenerating troops. With something like that in their hands, the USSR would have the manpower to reinforce their nuclear arsenal, and potentially even soldiers capable of surviving and healing from the effects of an atomic blast. On the 5th of May 1972, the first of the project's human test subjects began to show promising results. They underwent physical trauma at the hands of Zukal and the other scientists, only for their bodies to react much faster than the ordinary healing process would allow. Rapid clotting took place in the affected areas, preventing the subjects from bleeding out. However, this quickly went awry. The clots turned into severe lesions. Realizing this had occurred thanks to Macaulay, one of the other project scientists administering too much neodymium, Zukal chastised his colleague, vowing him to drag him to Moscow personally if another mistake like that ever took place again. Unfortunately, by the last few days of June, Dr. Zukal and his team were no closer to success. Every subject that underwent testing succumbed to the same necrosis. Reducing the amount of neodymium had only made the reaction worse, something Pavel couldn't allow Macaulay to know without the risk of it being held over his head for the remainder of the project. In every instance, the doctors were able to trigger rapid cell division, 50 times faster than that which occurs in the ordinary healing process of human beings. But the biggest drawback was that this division would quickly become uncontrollable. It was creating enough new matter on a cellular level that it would choke each test subject in its own excess waste. As you might expect, Dr. Zukal noted this in his diary that this process wasn't a pretty sight. Come mid-August 1972, the project scientists decided they needed a test subject with more resilience than the average person, and a suitable candidate was provided. He was a counter-revolutionary who had been sentenced to 15 years in a uranium mine as a punishment detail. Despite such an extended period of time under the harsh conditions of the mine and the close proximity to a radioactive element such as uranium, the man managed to survive unscathed. Upon closer examination, this new guinea pig, referred to as X16, had a rate of healing twice as fast as that of an average man. Perhaps it was a random genetic abnormality that made X16 this way, or maybe it was a result of his extensive time in the uranium mines. Either way, it made him the perfect new subject for Zukal's experiments. Initially, subject X16's preliminary testing results looked promising. The wound healing process was actually taking place now, instead of resulting in necrosis or aborting it as it had with the earlier experiments. In fact, Dr. Zukal seemed to think X16 was healing almost too quickly, but nevertheless, testing continued, although not without a different type of problem. The questionable morality of what they were doing began to set in for Pavel, causing him nights of endless tossing and turning, unable to sleep as he reflected on what he'd done. X16 had managed to survive for much longer than the earlier test subjects, but it was clear that the torture this man had to endure was exacting a heavy toll. Every day, the doctors would lacerate him, time and time again, recording the results. And every day, he survived, only for the cycle to begin again the next day. For his own part, Zukal was conflicted. On the one hand, the results of the testing were proving successful, lasting far longer and working far more effectively than they had in the past, and yet on the other, it came at the cost of one man's continued suffering. To make matters worse, Pavel had no way of voicing his concerns to any of his team. Any questioning of his orders or the project's methods would have been viewed by GRU Division P and the KGB as sedition and treason. earning the good doctor a one-way ticket to a gulag, or, if he was lucky, a clean shot to the back of the head from an agent's pistol. Often morality is sacrificed for the greater good, in the pursuit of the advancement of science or a nation's goals. But now that the project was showing results with X-16, now that it was real, what they were doing still weighed heavily on Dr. Zucal's conscience. Then, on October 15, 1972, the final piece of the puzzle seemed to become clear. By introducing the correct amount of stabilizing agent into the serum they had concocted, Zucal and his team had perfected the composition. Upon administering this newly completed version of the solution, the doctor noted in his diary that subject X-16 was responding well. At least, medically, the subject was responding well. It was clear that the continuous experimentation he had been subjected to was causing uncooperative behavior in X-16. But so close to the cusp of achieving the project's goals, Dr. Zucal was quick to cast aside his previous doubts about the ethics of their methods. They were so close to victory, so close to the project being over, that it no longer mattered how cooperative X-16 was being. But 2 weeks and 4 days later, just as the project was nearing its end goal, disaster struck. MU Dr. Elena Orakova was one of the scientists on Zucal's team, who had primarily helped when examining the early cell divisions, those that were leading to necrosis and causing test subjects to produce too much excessive genetic material. Elena had made a startling discovery and immediately brought it to Dr. Zucal in a distraught show of panic. The cell samples they had used to test their serum were now gaining mass, seemingly from nowhere. Just like the earlier experiments, the effects were working almost too well, causing an overabundance of cellular regeneration to the point where the cells couldn't stop producing masses of waste genetic material. When Zucal brought Elena's findings to Drs. Sislard and one Georgi T. Fedinko, the project heads assigned by Division P, they were quick to disregard it as an error, determining to press on with the project to meet their deadline. Over the course of the following weeks, up to late November, Zucal was trying to determine what was causing this change. It was clear that unless he and Elena could resolve the issues with the serum, subject X-16 would be a total failure. But time was running out, with their superiors at GRU Division P and the Kremlin expecting results by early December. Under untold amounts of pressure and subsequent stress, Dr. Pavel Zucal found himself losing time, unable to sleep to the point where he was drifting off whenever he was on the verge of a breakthrough. By the end, Elena was the only member of the team trying to help him methodically figure out what had gone wrong. The deadline for the project arrived on December 2nd, 1972. Pavel didn't sleep all night leading up to it, knowing he would have to present a functioning super soldier to GRU Division P. In the best case, he was risking being accused of negligent failure, forced to restart the project from scratch, making his months of hard work redundant. But worst case scenario, Zucal could be charged with treason for having not completed the task he was selected for. On the 2nd of December, he wrote, "I really don't know which is better. Tomorrow is a day too." Nobody knows if Dr. Pavel Zucal lived to see that tomorrow. His final diary entry was made on the day SCP-2102 was born. For months, the SCP Foundation had operatives embedded within the Czechoslovakian government as part of innumerable Cold War espionage gathering efforts. During that time, their agents had gathered enough intelligence to make the Foundation aware of a GRU Division P project based at the Institute of Experimental Medicine, and that the scientists there were looking to unlock the secret of rapid cellular regeneration. Someone, possibly even one of Zucal's team, had managed to infiltrate the project and had leaked documents to the SCP Foundation, explaining what was going on in Czechoslovakia. The plan was that the Foundation would move in secret of course, to extract and contain test subject X-16 in January of 1973. That day would never come to fruition though. On the 2nd of December, only a month before they had planned to act, the Foundation became aware of a catastrophe occurring at the Institute of Experimental Medicine. One of their agents in Czechoslovakia alerted them to a disturbance that had caused civilians and scientists alike to run from the institute in fear for their lives. Something had gotten loose, and the Foundation had to act fast. Luckily, a reconnaissance team was stationed in Eastern Europe. Members of various mobile task forces who had been spying on GRU Division P and the rest of the USSR. Moving quickly, the recon team was deployed to Czechoslovakia. Led by a field commander named Merrick, they were given the objective to determine the cause of the situation and, if possible, recover its anomalous source. Merrick and the recon team arrived on site at the Institute's grounds. The entrance to the bunker which had been housing the project was left wide open, with not a soul in sight. As the team progressed further, Merrick couldn't help but notice a pungent smell permeating the labs and offices that they passed. Foundation Command urged their operatives to proceed cautiously and recover any paperwork they could. Among the logistical documents was a diary belonging to one of the scientists, although the name Pavel Zukal on the cover was no longer legible, forever lost. The further he and the other MTF agents progressed, the worse the smell got. They located an elevator, deciding to take it down to the lower levels of the bunker. One by one, the team filed in, Merrick radioing command. "Command, any seismic activity in the area?" he asked. Not that we know of, Merrick," came the Foundation's reply. "Why?" I think I just felt something move down there." The elevator had barely descended a foot before it hit something, stopping in an instant. As Merrick tried once again to contact Foundation Command, that same something came tearing through the elevator floor. Over the radio, the SCP Foundation were treated to a cacophony of screeching, tearing metal, along with the screams of their own men. What Merrick and his team had encountered may have once been a man, perhaps someone subjected to cruelty and torture, but now all they saw was an amorphous, fleshy mass. Immediately, the recon team opened fire, engaging what they assumed was a raging monster. It probably never occurred to them that they might have just wanted to be free after years of imprisonment, followed by months of horrendous experiments. Minutes later, Merrick was able to get in contact with Command again, locked in a heated battle with the entity. But every round fired, every shot their guns landed, nothing was having any effect. Whenever Merrick dealt damage to the creature, part of it seemed to grow, faster and faster each time. Their guns were useless, unable to stop the expanding monstrous test subject. Even grenades thrown by the MTF operatives, causing multiple explosions, did little to stop the entity in its tracks. Listening in over the radio, knowing they had few options left, the SCP Foundation dispatched a pair of F-4 Phantoms, long-range supersonic fighter jets, equipped with a payload of M47A1 napalm incendiary bombs. With Merrick and his men almost on the ropes, Command issued an order to retreat. They fled the bunker, only to feel the ground shake beneath their feet. The monster had breached the topsoil, still coming after them. Jones, one of the Foundation's agents, was pulled under the encroaching shapeless mass, crushed to death as it continued its pursuit. Utterly horrified at the sight and speed of the creature, Merrick started begging Command over the radio to get its fighter jets to the scene. 6 minutes later, the sound of twin turbine engines shot through the air, followed by the whistle of bombs careening down towards the ground. In a second, Merrick, his team, and the creature were engulfed in a fiery explosion, the heat proving enough to cauterize the fleshy abomination's expanding tissue. Ever since December 1972, the entity now designated as SCP-2102 has been housed at Site-122, contained by the SCP Foundation. They keep it in a modified cell, restrained at all times with its hands and feet in padded sleeves. This is done in order to prevent the risk of injury, either accidental or intentional, given both SCP-2102's anomalous properties and its self-destructive tendencies. Its body is covered in scars, both from its previous escape attempts, back when it was known as Subject X-16, and from burns from the F-4 Phantom's napalm payload. These particular injuries seared the entity's ears, mouth, and eyes closed, rendering it deaf, mute, and blind. If SCP-2102 ever suffers any form of external injury, its anomalous properties will trigger. The creature, as you might have guessed, possessed an advanced form of cellular healing, able to regenerate from all wounds inflicted on it. However, the process was never perfected. It still works too well. So well that SCP-2102's cells don't know when to stop. Instead, they continue producing bodily tissue, expanding its mass into every available space without a halt. The process can be slowed if an obstacle is introduced, boxing in the exponentially growing tissue. However, any object or person in its path is eventually crushed under the mounting pressure. At present, the Foundation still has no idea how much SCP-2102's tissue could expand, potentially even posing a risk to the entire world if left unchecked. There is only one surefire way to stop the creature's healing. It can only be halted by cauterizing the open wound with intense heat. It's literally a surefire solution. SCP-2102 is a result of the good Dr. Zukal's work, combined with his and GRU Division P's willingness to put aside their morality. They didn't create an undying, regenerating super soldier for the USSR as they had intended. Instead, all they accomplished was turning a tortured man into a monster, an abomination endlessly tormented by the experiments performed on him. Not quite as useful on the battlefield, is it? It was November 20th, 2019, and the helicopter circled far above in the freezing wind of the Antarctic. SCP Foundation Site Director Jason Monroe looked down at the isolated above-ground facilities of Provisional Site 344-1. Something about this place made him nervous, edgy, and for good reason. Between 2003 and 2019, 29 Mobile Task Force units and 73 members of D-Class personnel had gone missing here and never been found. Monroe thought he was here for a routine investigation into negligence and mismanagement, but little did he know, he was in for so much more. This is the story of SCP-5545 and one man's journey into his own worst nightmare, literally. But this nightmare began a long time ago, 300 years to be exact. And like most nightmares, it started as a dream. That dream was one of expansion. National powers across Europe wanted to be the first to conquer the globe and expand into new territories, and sent countless exploratory missions off into the unknown to achieve this goal. Any history book will tell you that the first outsiders to lay eyes upon the continent of Antarctica did so in 1820. The reality is that the first ones to get there actually landed in the late 1700s. The hapless explorers ventured into mainland Antarctica and made base camps. Before searching and digging for any useful resources nearby, they came upon a strange discovery. A hallway hidden beneath the ice. Not a passage in the ice, but a true hallway, complete with light fixtures. The confused explorers ventured down into these impossible hallways, and for many of them, it would be the last thing they ever did. No matter how long they walked, it seemed like the hallways just kept going. As they continued to walk for hours, they hoped to find something, anything, and eventually, they did. They passed from these hallways into somewhere different altogether, and most of them were never heard from again. Those who did manage to escape often died or took their own lives soon after. Whatever it was they discovered down there, they didn't want to live with it on their minds. It's believed that over 70 colonial explorers disappeared or died this way, and that most who found these endless hallways beneath the Antarctic ice never returned. The multiple anomalous objects and phenomena that make up SCP-5545 came into the Foundation's hands several centuries later, on September 18, 2003, when during an expedition into the Antarctic, they too found the endless hallways. The Foundation built Provisional Site 344-1 around them, hoping to safely seal them off from any other unwitting Antarctic explorers or researchers. But there was something else lurking beneath the ice in Antarctica, something dangerous. The hallways were designated as SCP-5545-1 and were thought to be the extent of the anomalous activity at the site. But soon SCP-5545-2 was discovered, which resulted in the deaths of 16 researchers. So what exactly is 5545-2? It's an entity so volatile that even knowing about it is considered to be a containment breach. And as a result, it's kept in Provisional Site 344-2. Unlike Site 344-1, 344-2 isn't a physical space. It's conceptual, accessible only through the endless hallways, created with the express purpose of keeping 5545-1 and 5545-2 separate. Why? Because whenever the two come into contact, the result is 5545-3, the network of endless hallways expanding. If they remained in contact, the hallways would continue to expand and the entire planet could be filled with endless hallways in just 4 to 6 hours. While the two are apart though, 5545-3 reverses. but it always would take just a few hours to throw the whole world into a chaos of infinite hallways. SCP-5545 has been given the classification safe. Wait, we're dealing with a mysterious and volatile anomaly that claimed a huge number of lives and still somehow eludes true Foundation understanding, yet the official SCP Foundation classification is safe? How could this be? Monroe was the director of Site-58 and was the definition of no nonsense. Prior to taking the site director position, he was a decorated member of Mobile Task Force Eta-10 and helped contain numerous Keter-class anomalies. He'd been around the proverbial block when it came to anomalous activity, and something about SCP-5545 and the management of Provisional Site-344 seemed awfully suspicious to him, and he had questions. Like how such an unpredictable anomaly could be declared safe, and why had there been such a lapse of communication between the Foundation and Dr. Gabriel Reed, who'd been running the facility for the past 2 decades, and most of all, just what exactly was the mysterious SCP-5545-2? Monroe started to believe that something terrible had happened at the site, and Reed was covering it all up. But to find out for sure, he'd need to go to Antarctica and investigate it himself. Information about this supposedly safe anomaly was highly classified. Those without O5 clearance could face termination for snooping. But that didn't scare Jason Monroe. He dealt with Keters before. He could deal with this. Or so he thought. Monroe submitted a request and was granted unanimous approval by the O5 Council to travel to Provisional Site-344 and get to the bottom of this mystery. He took a chopper to the base soon after, armed with a concealed firearm and a hostile meme detector, or HMD, to test whether the base and its staff had somehow fallen under a hazardous mimetic effect from SCP-5545. He'd find the answers, or die trying. The moment Monroe arrived, he couldn't help but notice the strange way the staff behaved. They seemed listless, almost depressive. When he showed his credentials to a researcher, they simply said, SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site-344-2. His request to see Dr. Reed that night was denied. Dr. Reed was busy, he was told. Wait until tomorrow. The next day, Dr. Monroe met with Dr. Reed, but the results of the meeting were underwhelming to say the least. Just like the rest of the staff on the site, he seemed exhausted, as though he hadn't slept in days. His responses were quiet and evasive, and he refused to tell Monroe anything that wasn't in the official files already. Monroe ran the conversation through the HMD and found nothing out of the ordinary. What was going on here? Monroe was irritated, but not deterred. Nothing would stop him from finding out the truth. The next day, he flexed his O5 credentials and hacked into the base's security system. This gave him access to cameras around Site-344-1, but more importantly, there was a single camera inside the mysterious Site-344-2. Jackpot. But when he looked at it, the feed was an entirely black screen with the words SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site-344-2. The footage of the staff in 344-1 was equally strange. The 18 employees on site all sat at computer banks, with nothing but static playing on their screens. Monroe kept digging though, and was able to hack into the security footage of Dr. Reed's office. As he watched, he discovered a 15-minute period where Reed left the office each day. He could use this brief window to break in and collect more intel on SCP-5545-2. Monroe was so wrapped up in the investigation that he almost forgot the more immediate danger around him and nearly wandered into one of the endless hallways of 5545-1 by mistake. He made a note to be more careful in the future. His first attempt at breaking into Dr. Reed's office didn't produce many answers. One piece of evidence was a blurry picture of what looked like a mobile task force entering a 5545-1 hallway in the dark. Another was a spreadsheet featuring all the personnel, living or dead, who worked at the site, but one name, and the details of whether this person was alive or dead, was completely redacted. Anything particularly juicy was hidden behind O5 clearance. If Monroe wanted the answers, he needed to break through. That night, he had a horrific reoccurring nightmare, one that had plagued him since he joined MTF Eta-10. He dreamed that he was in a fancy dining room with a grand fireplace. The room was full of statues of men and women. The men looked angry, and the women looked afraid. As he approached the fireplace, the ceiling extended infinitely up into the darkness. Suddenly, the zombie-like body of a teenage girl appears in the fireplace, hanging from a long thread. Her eyes look furious and full of rage, and Monroe somehow knows that he's the reason for her hate. When he steps into the fireplace in this dream, she attacks him. The two intertwine, and they burn forever. The one difference was that in this new iteration of the dream, he blinked upon entering the fireplace, and suddenly he was in the hallway. He awoke sure that something was terribly wrong here, but he couldn't give up now. The next day, Dr. Monroe broke into Reed's office and made a horrifying discovery. He found files indicating that Dr. Reed was knowingly sending mobile task forces and D-class personnel into the infinite hallways of 5545-1 to their doom. He also found evidence that Reed and the researchers had been spying on him, somehow intercepting copies of the notes he had been taking. That's when Dr. Reed entered the office and interrupted him. Monroe panicked and drew his weapon, holding the doctor at gunpoint. He was breaking so many Foundation rules, but right now, he feared for his life. The doctor seemed unbothered by Monroe's threats, though. He told Monroe that everything was going to plan, and that he should go back to his room. Monroe was becoming increasingly paranoid. He felt that at any moment guards might burst in and execute him. Nothing about this place made sense. He worried he was going insane. Perhaps the only way to find answers was to go even deeper, to risk it all, and venture through the endless hallways to find SCP-5545-2 himself, and finally discover what this thing actually was. Monroe left his room and stepped into one of the endless hallways of 5545-1 that was located just across from his dorm. He found that it was a hallway like all the others on site, plain, concrete, worn of age, with simple light fixtures on the walls. He walked for hours, recording with a concealed device. The lights suddenly went out, leaving him in complete darkness. When they flicked back on, he was in a very different environment. A grand old carpeted hallway, the kind you'd see in an old mansion. He broke into a cold sweat. What was so familiar about this place? He kept walking, racked with terror, until this new hallway finally led him to the place he'd been seeking, Site 344-2, the domain of 5545-2. It was a large, poorly lit room, filled with grimacing statues and a large fireplace at the far end. It was the exact same room from Monroe's dream, with one horrifying difference. Monroe noticed a single white thread hanging down from the infinite ceiling, and when he looked up to find its source, he screamed. There were hundreds of bodies hanging and swinging from the ceiling above him. Everyone who SCP-5545-2 had ever killed, including MTF members, D-class personnel, and even the colonial explorers from hundreds of years before. And all of them were him, every single one. They had his face, and there, hanging in the middle of the room at ground level, was the body of a teenage girl, the one from his dream. In that moment, he finally recognized her. She was the girl he killed, the first him, hundreds of years ago. Much like Monroe, you're probably wondering, what is going on here? Thanks to declassified communication between Dr. Reed and the O5 Council, we can tell you. Jason Monroe is a man who's been reincarnated hundreds of times over the last 300 years, ever since he murdered a teenage girl, a girl named Emily, his daughter. This murder sparked the existence of SCP-5545 as an eternally reoccurring punishment for his crimes. Since figuring this out, the Foundation has kept tabs on Monroe's reincarnations, whether they're MTF members, D-class personnel, or even site directors. They see to it that these reincarnations always find their way back to 5545-2 to take his punishment and prevent the infinite hallway expansion that threatens to destroy the world. It's a plan everyone is in on, everyone except him. But every time he enters that nightmare-haunting room, it all comes rushing back. In that moment, though, he knew his crime, and he somehow knew how many times this punishment had unfolded for him. He now had two choices: repent and accept the punishment again, or leave and activate 5545-3, potentially allowing the endless tunnels to expand across the world. Like his many predecessors, Monroe made the decent choice. He accepted his punishment and allowed his own string to coil around him as the lights in the room went off, one by one, leaving only darkness. Jason Monroe, that version of him, at least, was never seen again. but the SCP Foundation is already eyeing up his next reincarnation and preparing to let this twisted cycle play out all over again. The booming steps echoed through the museum corridors. Pharaohs, emperors, and Mongolian war leaders all stood stock still as the terrified security guard ran between them. Roger Pascal swung his flashlight this way and that. The light glinted on the polished steel of ancient weaponry, muskets, scimitars, and cannons. Exhibit after exhibit flashed past him as he ran through the dark museum. There was no way it was real. No possible way. He was having a bad dream. That's all it was. A bad dream. The shaking ground under his feet and the marching rhythm of the impossibly heavy footsteps behind him told him that it was real, all right. It had just been a normal shift like any other, just a regular night at the museum. Roger had been sipping his coffee and listening to the radio when all of a sudden he felt his chair start rumbling beneath him. He put his coffee down on the table and watched as it recoiled as the footsteps grew louder and closer. He got up to investigate and couldn't believe what he'd walked in on. Skidding around the corner, he tumbled into a medieval suit of armor and sent it crashing across the floor. Chainmail helmet, gauntlets, all of it rattled and crashed to the marble floor, echoing all through the museum. Then there was a sudden deathly silence as the footsteps stopped. Roger didn't breathe. Then they started again, heading straight towards him. It was all Roger could do to lie on his back in front of the giant taxidermy eagle and point his flashlight at the door as the monstrous figure of the stone soldier walked around the corner, musket in hand. Woodstock, Vermont, 1995. It was a normal day just like any other. The birds were singing in the trees and there was a gentle breeze blowing through. Nothing at all out of the ordinary. Except, of course, the statue that opened its eyes. The Civil War Memorial had been a staple of Woodstock for well over 100 years. A plinth sitting in the middle of a park with a young soldier on top of it, holding a musket peacefully by his side. The statue had watched over the town generation after generation, except now its watching had become a little more active. It took several hours for anyone to notice. Dog walkers went past listening to their Walkmans. A banker sat on a bench opposite, deep in conversation on a giant brick phone. It was only when a young child running after her football looked up at the statue and saw it looking back at her that things changed. The girl's parents didn't listen to her, of course. Parents rarely do. But word quickly went around the girl's school. Most of the time, the statue was totally still, no movement in the eyes at all. But on occasion, when a group of kids gathered around it and talked to it enough, the statue seemed to look down at them as if it was listening. But that was it. No grown-ups were particularly interested in what the children were saying, and even a lot of the children who saw it went home, concluding that they must have been imagining things. So 6 months went by without anyone really paying the statue much attention. That was until it fired its gun. In a quiet rural town, everyone hears a gunshot, but for a long time no one could work out where it had come from. Police gathered around the park, searching all around where the weapon had been heard. The only clue they could find was a small hole in the wall of a shop across the street. A couple of officers joked that the shot must have come from the statue itself. Everyone laughed it off, except for a couple of the school kids who were playing nearby. Less than 2 weeks later, another shot rang out in the middle of the night, and a group of confused police officers rushed to the park to investigate what had happened. The only thing they found was a dead bird lying on the sidewalk, shot to death. Again, the jokes went around the department that it must have been the statue who did it. Except this time, the officers were all laughing a little less enthusiastically. Without much crime going on in Woodstock, Vermont, the department decided to take the shooting quite seriously, going so far as to perform an autopsy on the dead pigeon. But when they cut the animal open and looked at the wound inside its chest, they were filled with even more confusion than they were before. It wasn't a conventional bullet lodged into the bird's ribcage at all. It was perfectly round and made of what appeared to be stone. But the next shot that rang out from the memorial park was unmistakable. It was a weekend in the middle of the summer vacation, so the park was full of families all sitting around having picnics, barbecues, and staring up at the sky, watching the birds circle lazily overhead. Bang! One of the pigeons exploded in a burst of feathers and plummeted out of the sky, landing on the sidewalk in front of the whole town. In shock, all of the townsfolk turned around to see the stone statue down on one knee with his musket on his shoulder. The statue looked down at all of them, surprised at the attention, then quickly got back to its feet and resumed its normal stance. Reports flooded all the local papers and news stations. The event was blamed on mass hysteria, a kind of group hallucination where everyone was somehow sharing the same story. But the number of people coming forward with the exact same account was irrefutable evidence. That's where the Foundation had to step in. In January 1996, containment procedures began, and the statue was given the designation SCP-011. Of course, a large contingent of agents suddenly appearing in a small town would raise a lot of suspicion, so the Foundation had to move very cautiously. One agent at a time, the Foundation established itself in Woodstock and began to study the statue day in and day out. By sitting on park benches, even looking through cutout holes in newspapers, and wearing fake outfits so as not to arouse suspicion. Steadily over time, the statue appeared to gain either a heightened mobility or just a renewed sense of confidence. While much of the time it did remain standing immobile, it would begin to occasionally stretch when it thought no one was looking, and glance this way and that in apparent annoyance with the birds circling over its head. The shooting steadily grew more regular. Foundation agents observed several birds being picked out of the sky by the musket fire of SCP-011 over the following weeks. A clear pattern started to emerge. The statue would only fire at birds that seemed to be flying above it or getting too curious about it. In fact, the more fecal matter built up on the statue, the more aggressive it would be. Both in its body language and mood seemed to sour the dirtier it got. While there were initial concerns about the SCP potentially turning its rifle towards the local townspeople, these worries were largely dismissed as SCP-011 gradually started to build up a rapport with those around it. Before long, the caretakers of the park were having exchanges with the SCP. These exchanges started with the caretakers speaking directly to the SCP, and it nodding or subtly acknowledging the things they said. But over time, the interactions grew more and more personable. In the year 2000, SCP-011 spoke for the first time. It had just fired its rifle, picking off a pigeon from over 200 feet away, when a caretaker mildly exclaimed, "Nice shot!" The statue smiled, dipped his hat to the caretaker and said, "Thank you," in a gravelly voice. This marked a significant change in the Foundation's approach to the containment of SCP-011. Up until this point, the SCP was considered a broadly harmless member of the local town community. However, its ability to speak raised concerns as to this SCP's development. 4 years ago, it had been an immobile statue with nothing out of the ordinary to raise any suspicions among those around it. Where would its cognitive development end? Now that it had gained the ability to talk, groundskeepers and agents posing as groundskeepers struck up conversations with SCP-011 as often as possible. At first, these exchanges were brief, but over time, the SCP became steadily more vocal, until soon it was engaged in intellectual debates and sharing its views on the world with anyone who would listen. It was becoming clear that new containment measures were needed. In fact, SCP-011 soon lost interest in shooting birds. Or rather, the SCP was persuaded to stop shooting birds. While the prospect of having animals defecate on it still appeared to anger the statue, the Foundation was able to explain through ideological grounds why shooting birds was a disproportionate response relative to the minor harm they were doing to it. Keen to engage in philosophical and ethical discussions, the statue was very open to hearing the Foundation's viewpoint on the issue, and having sufficiently considered all sides of the debate, decided that it would, in fact, be better for the well-being of all involved if it stopped shooting the birds from the sky. In return, the caretakers and Foundation agents promised to do their best to clean it regularly and keep the animals at bay. But with word of this bizarre tourist attraction steadily gathering momentum as the age of email began to take off, the Foundation decided that it would be best to relocate SCP-011 entirely. However, agents who had been living in Woodstock for the prior 4 years were hesitant to relocate the entity to a test chamber or storage facility. The benefits that it had brought to the local community far outweighed the risks and threats that it posed. The statue had become a local celebrity, smiling and waving at children who went past, and even offering brief history lessons to any confused tourists who found themselves wandering through the park. Most just assumed it was a person in gray paint. It was Agent Khan who came up with the idea of relocating SCP-011 to a museum. Being kept indoors, away from the dangers of any fecal bombing runs, was the main priority. Khan argued that within a museum, the statue would blend in seamlessly with the exhibits around it. Furthermore, if anyone did see the statue move or talk, they would assume that it was an interactive exhibit and treated as such. Having shown a real love for academia, history, and debate, Khan believed that SCP-011 would benefit greatly from being in such a setting, both learning and eventually even teaching about the history of the American Civil War. However, when all these arguments were put forward to the statue itself, it was hesitant. Having spent the entirety of its cognitive existence standing on the same plinth, shooting at the same pigeons, the idea of relocating to somewhere new and unknown was very intimidating. Even with the soldier's mindset, SCP-011 was still feeling incredibly nervous about the idea of moving house. Agent Khan and SCP-011 found themselves locked in a stalemate. Try as she might, convincing the SCP to leave its current home was like talking to a brick wall, or rather, a stone wall. The pair of them ended up dropping the conversation for a couple years, focused instead on psychiatric evaluations and history lessons for the SCP. In 2002, the Foundation officially declared that SCP-011 had achieved sentience with a great enough level of self-awareness to pass as a normal human being, aside from the fact that it was composed entirely of stone. For 2 years, Agent Khan talked to SCP-011 every day on the park bench. The slats on the bench had to be replaced several times as the weight of the statue broke through them, snapping them clean in half on several occasions. During this period, the pair of them built up a rapport rarely seen between humans and SCPs. So much so that in 2004, Agent Khan managed to convince SCP-011 to move to a local museum on one condition: she would go as well. The Foundation agreed to the terms, deciding that Khan could take on the role of being a researcher in the museum. That way, she could keep an eye on SCP-011 and report any activities, while the Foundation officially relinquished control over the SCP. What happened next was perhaps rather predictable, or at least it would be predictable to anyone who had worked with Agent Khan and SCP-011 during that time in Vermont. As the pair of them moved into their new lives at the museum, romantic feelings blossomed between them. Seeing as SCP-011 is officially outside of the SCP Foundation's jurisdiction, there has been no official inquiry into the nature and practicalities of the relationship between the woman and the statue. But from the reports that make their way to the Foundation every 3 months, it is clear that both are very much enjoying the privacy of their new arrangement. Roger Pascal closed his eyes, imagining the barrel raising higher and higher until it was pointed squarely at his face. He had been told by his bosses not to ask questions about the origins of the statue that had suddenly appeared in the Civil War section. Even when he saw the statue's eyes moving, he'd kept his mouth shut. That was until he was doing his security rounds that night and heard those booming footsteps leading him behind one of the displays. He had rushed over in a panic. Peering around the corner, he had been shocked to see Miss Khan, one of the researchers here, and the Civil War statue engaged in a passionate kiss. He had turned and bolted as fast as he could until he ended up here, terrified on the floor as he imagined the musket being leveled at him. But then a second pair of footsteps joined the group, and a woman's laugh filled the room. Opening his eyes, the security guard saw the pair of them, the statue and the researcher standing in the doorway, laughing about the whole situation. The musket was slung over the man's shoulder as he offered a cold, stony hand down to the security guard to help him up. Ironically, there was something about the statue's smile that softened Roger's stony heart as he was hauled to his feet. I have so many questions.
Flying in a plane nowadays is about as safe as catching a ride on a bus or commuting on the subway. Of course, that doesn't stop people being afraid of flying. To some, the prospect of long-haul flights or feeling the shudder of turbulence are reasons to avoid planes altogether. And then, every year, there are stories of downed flights or those that go missing, all adding fuel to that aviophobia fire. Take, for example, the infamous Bermuda Triangle, that well-known region of the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean. What does that have to do with a fear of flying? Well, famously, a high number of aircraft are believed to have mysteriously vanished while flying over the Bermuda Triangle. Their wreckage and passengers rarely ever recovered. Stories like that are enough to make anyone think twice about setting foot in a plane again. And then, there's SCP-787. As you may have already guessed, SCP-787 is a plane. Specifically, it is a Boeing 747-200, with a wingspan of nearly 200 feet and capable of seating over 800 passengers. The 747-200 is a part of the famous Boeing 747 family of aircraft. These are quad-engine commercial airliners, designed to be the safest ever built. The particular Boeing 747-200 that has since become known by the Foundation as SCP-787 is slightly different from one that might take you from your nearest airport to your long-awaited vacation, though. For one, SCP-787 has no known date of manufacture and no call sign, both which a standard Boeing aircraft would be expected to have. Additionally, the plane's entire exterior has been repainted. Strangely, even the windows have been painted over, and the paint was still wet when SCP-787 was first discovered. As for the inner workings, all of SCP-787's mechanical components, including its turbines, engines, and landing gear, are in perfect working order with no signs of any damage. In fact, the SCP Foundation's researchers aren't even sure that SCP-787 has actually flown since its construction. The plane's machinery looks so pristine that they might be brand new, with no detectable signs of any previous use. However, inside the main body of the plane, it seems to be a different story. Anything not mechanical, like the carpets and seats, have decayed over time. Perhaps strangest of all is the cockpit. Both the pilot's and co-pilot's chairs have been replaced with two masses of computer components arranged to take the shape of two chairs. So what, you might be thinking? After all, SCP-787 is, for all intents and purposes, just an ordinary plane. Not enough to put you off flying, right? Nothing more than a Boeing with a few little things off about it, like some missing seats and decaying upholstery. Well, there's that. And then there's the over 500 dead bodies on board. In June 1987, this flight of the dead was discovered several kilometers outside of the city of Bremerton in Washington state. The SCP Foundation moved in, securing the plane and swiftly getting it into containment. Now kept within a Foundation hangar, the interior of SCP-787 is monitored for 24 hours a day. Surveillance cameras and microphones are located within the cockpit, passenger areas, and even the plane's baggage hold, with recorded footage and sound relayed back to the Foundation. The idea of a plane filled with cadavers is certainly unnerving, and more than a little creepy. But why the need for all the surveillance? After all, the bodies on board are all dead, right? Surely they're not going anywhere. Well, let's talk about those bodies. How would you expect someone to die when they are aboard a plane? Maybe they'd be thrown around during a crash landing. Or perhaps a sudden depressurization might cause the passengers to suffocate due to lack of oxygen. Under normal circumstances, you might be right, but SCP-787 is no ordinary plane, and the passengers on board were not killed in ways you might expect from any ordinary aircraft accident. Referred to by research staff as SCP-787A specimens, the cadavers aboard this particular Boeing 747-200 all have dramatically different causes of death. Some of the specimens show signs of strangulation, others seem to have starved or drowned. Other bodies on board have injuries like gunshot or stab wounds, while further corpses look to have died as a result of blunt force trauma. A few have even been exsanguinated, that is, completely drained of all of their blood. One commonality among all the specimens on board SCP-787 is that some form of mutilation has occurred. 23 passengers had their tongues removed, a further 73 were scalped, 230 had Cyrillic letters carved into their left hands, and almost 500 of the passengers had their fingertips removed. Let's recap what we have so far. First, there's the Boeing 747-200 found randomly sitting in a field. Second, it's filled with over 500 mutilated bodies. And third, each one appears to have died from a cause you wouldn't typically expect from an airline accident. Seems strange enough, But of course, then there's the apparitions and noises that manifest inside SCP-787, which is why the Foundation keeps the plane under round-the-clock surveillance so they can monitor any anomalous activity taking place aboard this flight of the dead. Any attempts by Foundation personnel to enter the plane during an anomalous occurrence have led to individuals being physically ejected from SCP-787, causing severe organ damage and internal bleeding for up to 72 hours. The anomalies that occur inside SCP-787 range from the presence of loud noises with no obvious source, to the manifestation of strange human-shaped entities within the plane. The first anomalous occurrence recorded within SCP-787 was in 1988, when the sound of a loud pounding was heard against the doors and windows of the plane's left side. 2 years later, a male voice could be heard from the onboard bathroom, repeating a singular phrase over and over. Philosophers always run from the advanced thickening treatment. In 1993, the plane's in-flight entertainment system seemed to be activated by itself. The overhead screen showed a bizarre choice of in-flight movie. Colorless pictures of a deceased man, accompanied by a female voice reading a gynecology book in Czech. The same year, the longest lasting of the SCP-787 anomalies took place. This time, the plane's fasten seatbelt sign spent almost 4 hours flickering, while the first 15 seconds of Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit played on a loop over the onboard speakers. It wasn't until 1997 that the first of the humanoid entities appeared aboard SCP-787. This figure was indistinct, lacking any discernible detail, little more than just a human shape standing in the aisles. Observed by the Foundation's surveillance equipment, the figure was seen removing an emergency oxygen supply and mask from seat H-43. It stood perfectly still, wearing the passenger's breathing mask for over 2 minutes before removing the mask and disappearing from the view of the cameras placed on board. The figure did not appear anywhere else inside the plane. Another figure appeared 4 years later in 2001, sitting in the massive computer parts that made up the co-pilot's chair. This figure, much like its predecessor, was indistinct in its features. For almost 4 minutes, it sat in the cockpit of the Boeing 747-200, just whimpering softly. Then it lurched forward, vomiting all over the console in front of it, before quickly disappearing like the first figure. SCP personnel collected a sample of the vomit the entity left behind. After performing an analysis of the sample, research staff found traces of nitrous oxide, thorium, bird droppings, and 3 human fingernails. At present, the origin of these humanoid figures is still unknown. Could these entities be the souls of the dead passengers, trying to offer insight into what happened aboard this flight? Or perhaps these indistinct human-shaped creatures are the ones responsible for the deaths of SCP-787's passengers? The next anomaly within SCP-787 occurred in 2005, when a female voice was recorded speaking through the onboard speaker system. The voice said, "For your comfort and enjoyment today, pancakes will now be served. Please do not leave your seat. Pancakes will now be served. Please do not leave your seat. Do not leave your seat. Leave your seat, please. Pancakes will now be served. Yay! Pancakes." Exactly what the relevance of pancakes are to a plane full of bodies is still under investigation by the SCP Foundation. Next, in 2007, the Boeing's overhead emergency air masks fell from the ceiling, only to be snatched back upwards. They continued deploying and retracting for 14 minutes, while the plane was simultaneously filled with the noise of screams. Finally, the only other notable anomaly took place a year later, when the onboard temperature within SCP-787 dropped 33 degrees, from 20 to -13 Celsius in a matter of seconds. By the late 2000s, the Foundation's researchers was having little luck understanding the nature of SCP-787's anomalies. Instead, they turned their attention to identifying the bodies of the deceased passengers on board. Through the use of advanced forensics and population databases, these researchers attempted to determine where exactly these bodies had come from. Researchers still haven't determined if they all died on the plane, or if someone had exhumed them from graves before placing them aboard for some unknown reason. In fact, the answer was neither, and Foundation researchers discovered something that no one had expected. One of the passengers was still alive. To clarify, the body aboard SCP-787 was definitely still deceased, but researchers identified the cadaver as a retired optometrist from Atlanta, Georgia, who is still very much alive. Foundation agents found the man was simultaneously alive and well in his Atlanta home, but also dead on board the Boeing 747-200. The subject was interviewed by agents and had no prior knowledge of any incident taking place in June 1987, when SCP-787 was first discovered. Even more interestingly, he claimed that he never even set foot aboard an airplane, which his wife and son both confirmed to be true. So what does this mean? How could the same man have been alive in Georgia and dead aboard SCP-787? Perhaps the answer can be found in a surprising place: the plane's toilet, or to be more specific, the place where the things flushed in the toilet go to. Examinations of the airplane's waste storage tank have revealed something very surprising. There was one more SCP-787A specimen that had been overlooked. It is unknown just how he got in there, but researchers discovered the body of an Indian man who looked to be in his 30s. The man, who was wearing a three-piece suit, was found to be carrying a number of puzzling items, including a surgical mask and gloves, an unloaded Beretta DT-10 shotgun, several cinnamon-flavored mints, a switchblade knife, an amulet that appears to depict the Eye of Horus, and a ticket stub for the Return of the Jedi with the number 92 written on the back. All of these objects seem to be completely random, and the Foundation has been unable to make sense of what they were doing on the man, or why his body does not seem to show the same state of decay as the rest of those found on board. There was one item that may hold some answers, though. For some reason, this man also possessed a copy of SCP-787's flight log. The log consisted of a series of coordinates, which were repeated 5,478 times. The coordinates point to a seemingly random spot in the Pacific Ocean, several hundred miles away from the infamous Pitcairn Islands, the island that the famous mutineers of the HMS Bounty settled after taking over the ship and leaving the captain adrift on the ocean. Is this location the secret to SCP-787? While none of this is confirmed nor denied by anyone at the SCP Foundation, one theory surrounding the area is that the location is another Bermuda Triangle-like location, one that contains some sort of temporal anomaly that unwitting planes fly through, only to find themselves displaced in time. Of course, the problem with this theory is that the man from Atlanta said he'd never been aboard a plane before. Or at least, not yet. It is entirely possible that SCP-787 is a plane that made a flight at some point in the not-too-distant future, only to arrive back in June 1987 by passing through a temporal breach in the area near the Pitcairn Islands. Sure, it might not explain what happened to everyone on board, but it could at least explain how SCP-787 arrived where and when it did. Every plane is fitted with a device that records flight data, in the event of a crash or other accident, known to most as the plane's black box, and researchers were able to uncover SCP-787's inside a compartment under one of the plane's seats. The recorder was found within a compartment filled with toxic asbestos and dried human blood. They hoped that perhaps it would contain some answers as to what exactly SCP-787 had come from, and what had happened to its passengers. Sadly not. The flight data recorder contained no information besides one simple phrase: "To be sorry." While an inexplicable mystery, SCP-787 is at least classified as a safe anomaly by the Foundation, seeing as it poses no realistic threat or shows signs of trying to break out of containment. The aircraft has only ever caused harm to anyone trying to enter during one of its sporadic anomalous events. But apart from that, it sits gathering dust in a hangar, just waiting for someone to crack its secrets. And who knows, maybe one day you'll be sitting on a plane that's taking you to your South Pacific vacation, and the retired optometrist sitting next to you will remark that you're passing over the Pitcairn Islands, and you'll discover for yourself exactly what happened to SCP-787. When you think of the SCP Foundation, you probably think of the organization being primarily based in the United States. After all, many of the anomalies we cover here on SCP Explained happen to take place in America, so it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. The fact of the matter is that the anomalous is not just confined to the United States, and if it were, the Foundation would have a much easier time doing its job than it actually does. Unfortunately for the Foundation, it's not just the US that they have to focus their efforts on. It's the entire world. That's right. No matter where you are on Earth, no matter how far you travel, the threat of being the victim of an unsuspecting anomalous incident remains the same, even on your family vacation to Disney World. Of course, the Foundation's mission is massively expansive too. with each object requiring not only significant resources to capture, but even more to effectively contain and study over a long period of time. And then you have the utilities of each site, keeping the power on and the water running. Or what about actually paying the hardworking SCP personnel who put their lives on the line every day? How about keeping global reconnaissance as a watchful eye in case of talk of any unnatural incidents start making the rounds in the ordinary world? What about maintaining a standing army of trained task force operatives, far deadlier than any other military force on the planet? Resources to cover up events as soon as they happen, field agents, database expenses. It's unimaginable to think of the costs of operating the Foundation in one country, let alone on a global scale. So how do they manage this heavy responsibility? How does the SCP Foundation divide up its resources accordingly, as well as raise enough money to continue operating? Think about it. If you were an organization having to cover the entire globe in service of protecting humanity from the anomalous, what would be the best way of managing your resources? First, you need to make sure you are backed by the richest of the rich, who could use some of their personal wealth to fund your goals. Well, that's the Overseer Council, the group at the top of the Foundation composed of some of the most affluent and wealthy individuals in the world. Second, you'd make sure you had a means of generating revenue. The Foundation can't exactly open itself for donations from the public, and it can't issue taxes, but it can have others do that for them. Cover-up businesses in sourcing funding from the governments of the world, either legitimately or through blackmailing, are two surefire ways to keep the cash flowing endlessly. Who knows how many Fortune 500 companies are actually owned by the Foundation? There's a lot of money in the world to go around, but someone needs to capitalize on it in order to get it. But the most important way to manage global resources is decentralization. Remember what we said about the perception of the Foundation being US-based? Well, it is true that the Foundation has its origins in the United States, and the country is the center of a large number of containment efforts. But the English-speaking branch of the Foundation is far from the only one. Allow us to introduce international branches, or -INT for short. The Foundation likes to codify its various branches based on the majority language spoken there. So the English-speaking branch would cover nations such as the United States, Canada, and parts of Europe, while in regions where Chinese is spoken, the Chinese branch presides over the territory. Truly, the containment of the anomalous is a global effort, with at least one Foundation site located in each country: Africa, India, Japan, Latin America. There isn't a part of the world that the Foundation doesn't have covered, and for good reason too. Anomalous objects can be discovered anywhere and everywhere. Having locations near all major population centers isn't just a luxury of having unlimited funding. It is the very thing that necessitates such funding. And with international branches adhering to their own policies, holding their own personnel, and speaking their own languages, it should come as no surprise that they have their own database of SCP objects too. That's right, each branch has an archive of files of their own, written based on objects contained in their respective country. Imagine being the guy who's just finishing reading all of the files currently existing in the English database, when you realize then you have to drudge through several more databases filled with thousands upon thousands of files just to be the completionist your heart wants you to be. It is a time-consuming task, but that's what we're here for. And today we're going to boost your own international database with coverage of SCP-007-INT, an anomaly sourced from the Foundation's global database. It all started in Massa Rosa, Italy, a medium-sized town located just outside Pisa. It's not famous for much, well outside of hosting the annual Massa Rosa International Piano Competition, which we should remind you that we're all very excited about this year considering Dr. Clef himself has decided he'd enter. But enough about Agent Ukulele's wild pianist skills. Let's get back to the story at hand. A contingent of mobile task force operatives sourced from a squad dubbed Smoking Anomalous Snakes, who belonged to the Foundation's Italian branch, were stationed in the town for the past week. Given that Massa Rosa is smaller than the average city, with a population numbering just over 22,000, these operatives had to take extra precaution as to not give away their presence. In a town where everyone knows everyone, a gaggle of unfamiliar faces making their way through could set off proverbial alarms in the local population. The Foundation operatives were there for a single purpose: to source the production of anomalous weaponry rumored to be occurring throughout the region. Now, why is this a problem in the first place? As technology advances, war changes along with it, sometimes necessitating the need for more efficient weapons and inspiring their development. Spears to deal with the invading tribes on land, horses and chariots to rush those with spears, bows and arrows to combat horses. War has always made use of new technology to make combat more efficient and deadly, and anomalous weaponry is no different. After all, not every paranormal organization holds the same ethos as the Foundation's secure, contain, protect mentality. There are many groups of interest, such as the dreaded Chaos Insurgency, or the Foundation's greatest rival, the Global Occult Coalition, that would be more than happy to utilize research into the anomalous for military purposes. And who can blame them? With anomalous weaponry, situations can be resolved, and enemies eradicated easier and deadlier than ever before. Up against a world that doesn't abide by their mission, even the Foundation is forced to utilize anomalous weaponry, albeit on a much smaller scale. Take Task Force Alpha 9 Last Hope, a squad made up entirely of SCP objects, such as SCP-105, Iris Thompson, and SCP-4494, the world's greatest arbiter of vigilante justice, otherwise known as the Spectre. Even mobile task forces, such as Samsara, a group of heavily augmented cybernetic super soldiers, make use of anomalous weaponry to further advance their efficiency on the field. After all, task forces spend their time combating anomalies in the field. It only makes sense to fight fire with fire, so to speak. Third-party sellers and producers of anomalous weaponry often provide the technology to establish groups of interest. So the Foundation getting the jump on a distribution center in Massarosa, Italy was a strategic move on the part of the Foundation. They weren't sure of the exact details, but their sources tipped them off about a gang of fascist neo-Nazis in the area, working on supplying anomalous weaponry to the criminal underworld. It's bad enough that the trigger-happy radicals at the Chaos Insurgency have access to anomalous means of destruction. Imagine if every 2-bit gangster and minor criminal had their hands on something as deadly as an SCP object, and they could acquire even more powerful equipment if they wanted. If the fascists made their money, who knows where their anomalous weaponry would wind up? The Foundation wasn't sure what they were manufacturing, but they were positive that it wasn't good. Their source explicitly described it as a weapon that could change the course of war as they understood it. A living, breathing shield. Naturally, the Foundation was just as interested in potentially finding a purpose for this mystery weapon as they were in taking it out of the hands of the black market suppliers. What uses could it hold in the field? Could it provide an extra layer of protection for the Foundation operatives? The operatives were compiled from a vanguard and reconnaissance team, and were the only ones the resource-strained Italian branch had available for the job. They spent days combing through the town until they stumbled upon what they believed to be a hideout for the gang. While attempting to investigate, a mysterious man ran out in front of the team, darting towards them from across the street. The team went to shoot, but hesitated after realizing that the man was accompanied by a mysterious silver balloon-like entity ominously floating above his shoulder. Not only that, but he was wearing a full suit of protective equipment, almost like a beekeeper's suit. The operatives opened fire at the unidentified target, but before their bullets could make contact, the silver balloon began bubbling and spread itself across the man's body like a protective sheet. It was then they knew they found their living shield. The bullet slid right off the man, hitting the liquid covering him and immediately being negated by its anomalous properties. Then, before the team could react, the liquid shot forward, detaching from the man's body and latching onto a Foundation operative. The silver gel began to writhe and constrict, attempting to absorb the operative through his protective gear. In a quick executive decision, the team lead made the choice to put the operative, who was in the midst of being absorbed by the gel, out of his misery. After all, they couldn't take risks when dealing with an unknown anomaly, especially one that they already knew was being utilized as a deadly weapon. As soon as the body dropped dead, both the liquid and the gang member took off through the streets, and the Foundation gave pursuit. The Foundation chased the man through the narrow maze-like streets of the town, with the silver liquid tailing after them and attempting to absorb even more operatives. Thankfully, the gel wasn't fast. The man, however, was another story. The operatives chased and chased, indiscriminately unloading a salvo of bullets into the general area. A few struck, puncturing the man's skin and causing him to bleed. Following the trail of blood, the Foundation was able to corner him into a street alley. But then, all of a sudden, The gel burst through the concrete wall the man was backed up against, the anomaly now larger than ever. The goo reconnected with the man, shielding him from the Foundation's firepower and allowing him to run away and escape. The Foundation briefly retreated and reconvened with their superiors to try to find the best strategy to move forward. They then took to the streets again, searching for the man and any trace of the anomaly. They found bits of the liquid strewn through the streets, squirming and writhing. Unlike the first batch, these bits were able to be neutralized via regular bullets. Their search eventually bore fruit, and they found the man patching himself up in a nearby cellar. He had a briefcase, and the area around him seemed to be a type of laboratory. Still, they were unable to find the silver balloon anomaly. The operatives, with weapons drawn, attempted to speak with the man, but he lashed out and shot at them, prompting them to shoot back, immediately killing him. They weren't able to get much information from him, but it was an act of self-defense. The Foundation, now with their only source of information gone, resorted to looking through the rest of the basement. They found a series of documents held inside the room, all written in Italian. They also found a tunnel leading outside the town and a small cart that was intended to be used to transport cylinders containing the silver liquid out of Massa Rosa. The Foundation was very quick to stop this anomaly from getting out on the black market, as it seemed like this was a distribution and testing center. But with the man dead and the gel contained, they realized their mission was complete and collected all remaining documents and traces of the silver liquid anomaly. In a joint effort between the Italian and Lusophone branches, the liquid was transported to Brazil for further research and classified as SCP-007-INT. The Lusophone branch's Board of Superintendents had made the decision earlier that SCP-007-INT held historical and research significance for the two branches, as some of the task force members that aided in the capture of the anomaly were sourced from Brazil. The documents were shared between both branches, and chemical research on the object was conducted. Immediately, the Foundation discovered the reason why the liquid responded so quickly to the man who was distributing it, and why it works perfectly as a living shield. SCP-007-INT is sentient and capable of recognizing patterns and portraying emotion, albeit to small degrees. Research into SCP-007-INT's composition and responses to stimuli in a lab environment continued, but one researcher from the Italian branch noted that this wasn't the first time they had encountered an anomaly like this. When dealing with a group of organizations known as the Fascist Council of the Occult, the Foundation discovered a heavily redacted and secret anomalous weapon with certain properties similar to SCP-007-INT. While the details of this weapon were lost to the database and above our clearance level, we can assume that due to the Nazi connection between the man distributing the liquid and the Fascist Council of the Occult, that portions of SCP-007-INT managed to make their way to the black market and proliferate the criminal underworld. But when all the research was said and done, what was SCP-007-INT? The studies were conducted as a joint operation between the two branches, and as a result, allowed for a significant amount of testing. Researchers found that the gel was adaptable, durable, and intelligent to a certain degree, but they also discovered that their data was incredibly similar to another anomaly in their database, recorded by the Lusophone branch's predecessor, the Scientific Academy of the Anomalous. You see, the Foundation hasn't been around forever. Before it, the anomalous containment world was decentralized and composed of tinier organizations, and this was one of them. As it turns out, this organization recorded data remarkably similar to SCP-007-INT, but the details of the research was lost due to an incident involving rogue agents defecting from the organization. Think the Chaos Insurgency, but before them too. The two instances of the anomaly were apparently a perfect match to SCP-007-INT, and the two branches had both contained the same anomaly across decades, without being aware that the other had done it. While the documents were lost when defecting agents broke away from the Academy, researchers theorized that they either defected into or sold information about the anomaly to the Fascist Council, who were able to improve the liquid and turn it into a formidable military-grade weapon. Still, the experiments with SCP-007-INT proved to be a success. The anomaly's sapience allowed it to form a bond with its host, protecting and showing the desire to comfort them if need be. What a nice little hunk of deadly gunk, right? But then, Just as the branches were about to give up on finding the Academy's old documentation for SCP-007-INT, they happened to discover it. The anomaly was given the codename Project Mel. This initial research found that the anomaly was incredibly adaptive, as seen below. Instance Alpha is the most belligerent case of SCP-007-INT. It prefers being involved in combat-oriented exercises and watching martial performances. Alpha has demonstrated a certain degree of infatuation to the party with, in its conception, the best performance by using its pseudopods in attempts to imitate some executed movements for the respective party to see. Instance Beta is an exemplary case of personality. I've witnessed Beta abducting a stuffed penguin, irresponsibly given by one of its operators, to demonstrate affection. Beta also displayed excitement when presented with pictures of penguins. An extraordinary situation involving Beta happened when it parted itself. Its copy assumed the form of a penguin, which Beta proceeded to care for in the likeness of an animal companion. Beta protected and guided the copy through the training course until the spontaneous expiration thereof. Instance Gamma possesses a particularly high physical intelligence. It is expressly competent in solving movement-related problematics, such as obstacle courses involving the manipulation of sensitive objects, and complex movement and transformation patterns. Interestingly, Gamma has been seen reacting to music by dancing to the respective rhythm. This original documentation proved to be valuable to the Foundation, as it provided further information on what occurred when SCP-007-INT was stolen from its original location and placed into the hands of the Fascist Council. On December 25, 1972, several security breaches across the Academy occurred, as sleeper agents of the Council stole various anomalous assets from storehouses and vaults across the country. For 2 hours, the group of 6 rogue individuals took what they could, smuggling the objects away from the organization for the purposes of using and selling them to the highest bidder. Objects stolen included Project Mel, several prototype prosthetics, and various other pieces of high-security Academy documentation. The Foundation also discovered that these sleeper agents within the Academy were students, researchers, and operatives who had been working with the organization for years, sometimes decades. Given their history, it's possible that they may have been coerced rather than them being outright agents of the Fascist Council of the Occult. Unfortunately, all of them expired during the interrogation procedures, and only one survived, captured by the Academy via suspended animation, though their whereabouts in the present day are unknown. It's unknown if the Foundation has seen the last of SCP-007-INT, or if samples of the deadly adaptive shield are still lurking in the anomalous criminal underworld. Regardless, whoever possesses SCP-007-INT is surely to be a formidable force for anyone to go up against.
London is the second largest city in Europe, and underneath this bustling city is one of the oldest and largest networks of train tunnels in the world. But that's not the only huge old structure located beneath the city of London. Below even the deepest underground metro stations of this historic city, there's a whole artificial world of surveillance cyborgs, impossible architecture, and stomach-churning nutritional supplements. So be sure to mind the gap, because we're about to take you on a tour of SCP-1678, also known as UnLondon. SCP-1678 is located 1 kilometer below the city of London, England. From all appearances, it seems to be an exact copy of the city, though aesthetically, it's more in line with how it was around the turn of the 20th century. Gas streetlights stand on every corner, and the modern skyscrapers of the business district are recreated in the style of Victorian architecture. The epicenter of construction appears to be the Houses of Parliament, which is evidenced by the more unfinished and flawed the city becomes further out from the center one goes. Some of the buildings are made of nonsensical materials like copper pipes, and some of the gas lamps are nothing more than a ball of disembodied light floating atop a metal pole. The first big question that the Foundation had upon discovering this location was, of course, why on earth was it created? And they wouldn't have to look far, as an explanation of this bizarre mirror city plays automatically upon entering. My fellow citizen, if you are hearing this tape, then the world as we know it is finished. The sky has broken, the ground heaves with the tramp of terrible feet, and all the horror and madness from the dark corners of the world has broken free to exact its vengeance on the world of man. Evil has raised its bloody flag upon all nations of the world and crowned its unholy victory to the broken sky. Yes, this is the end, but there is a new hope. Welcome to UnLondon, a city of survivors, a city of the free. Together, fellow citizen, we will wait and prepare for the new beginning, the grand new world that is soon to come. Let the world above burn, we will endure. Let the monsters have their world, we will prepare, we will wait. And I tell you, citizen, that there will be a new morning, and you will emerge from UnLondon and stand blinking in the sun. And on that day, citizen, there shall be a new order as we raise the Union flag over the entire world. I welcome you to UnLondon, the last city and the first. From this message, it seems that this mirror city was built to be a refuge for survivors of an apocalyptic scenario, but the SCP Foundation had no knowledge of such a plan. In fact, it's still unknown who created this place, or how they did it. The one fact that was evident to the Foundation was that even though this strange place was intended to be a safe haven, it was far too poorly constructed to actually act as one. Illumination was unreliable, and most of the buildings were damp and infested with mold. It's also unclear to the Foundation where the oxygen and gas supply of UnLondon was coming from. Throughout the day, the loudspeakers around UnLondon play automated messages such as, "No one is safe from the influence of mimetic beings. Bryson's Home for the Poor is here to help." And, "Crime will not be tolerated in UnLondon. The tormentors of society will become its defenders." At the end of every hour that passes, the speakers announce the time, followed by, "And all is well." When the SCP Foundation first entered UnLondon, it was unknown whether or not any living things inhabited the city. On first investigation, it seemed from its state of disrepair that the city had been long abandoned. But soon, the Foundation met their first inhabitant of the underground city. Mobile Task Force members were inspecting the area around the Houses of Parliament when they discovered what looked to be a bank. As they approached the doors, they heard the following announcement over the nearby loudspeakers. "Citizen, you are entering a restricted area. Have your authorization papers ready. A Bobby will arrive to escort you shortly." This signaled the approach of SCP-1678-A, also known as the Bobbies. A single instance of SCP-1678-A appeared with the unmistakable sound of a police whistle, and as soon as it arrived, it started attacking the members of the task force. Another announcement came over the speakers. "Police, halt! Criminal!" The Bobbies are the main threat to visitors in UnLondon, and they will attack on sight with any improvised weapon they can find. True to their name, they are all dressed in uniforms consistent with those of London City police officers from the Victorian era. What sets them apart from their historical counterparts is their construction. These beings are made out of human corpses, crudely dismembered at the joints, and reassembled using metal hinges and bolts with their heads wrapped in bandages. Bobbies are extremely hard to kill, with only high-caliber rounds and explosive weapons being effective at putting them down. Autopsies of dead Bobbies have shown that underneath the police uniform, the Bobbies all wear prison inmate-style jumpsuits. This adds a chilling context to the announcement about the tormentors of society becoming its defenders. It appears that the Bobbies are the reanimated bodies of prisoners. In addition to the Bobbies, the Foundation cataloged 2 additional forms of artificial life present within UnLondon. First are SCP-1678-B, or Eyes in the Sky, hybrid biomechanical birds made of flesh with an exoskeleton of copper wiring. Some of these creatures are covered in a deteriorating outer layer of plastic and feathers, suggesting that they were originally meant to resemble pigeons. As their name suggests, Eyes in the Sky serve as a type of surveillance drone, and while they have no offensive capabilities, they still pose a significant threat to the Foundation. It's still unclear whether they're able to communicate with or summon the Bobbies, but the SCP Foundation takes no chances. The last life form present in SCP-1678 is the strangest and the most frightening, SCP-1678-C, known as the Wretch. The Wretch has only ever been encountered outside the zone, which is now under SCP Foundation control, and it's uncertain how many instances of this being exist. The wretch resembles an old woman, or sometimes old man, dressed in filthy rags. The wretch sits at street corners holding a begging tray and will attempt to elicit pity from anyone who happens to walk by. The wretch will ask for food or money, but if food is supplied, it will start weeping before vanishing into a puff of black smoke. On a few occasions, audio notices playing on the city's loudspeakers have alluded to this being, saying, "Do not pity the wretch. Allow them to pay the price of their betrayal for all eternity." The current Foundation protocol with regards to the wretch is to not engage with it at all. In addition to the bobbies, the eyes in the sky, and the wretches, there's another strange component to the world of UnLondon. Throughout the city, in any area designed for human habitation, the Foundation discovered multiple machines that resembled modern gas pumps. These machines are fitted with coin slots and rubber hoses that, when coins are inserted, dispense a porridge-like substance advertised as Dr. Goody's Wonder Food. According to posters around the city, Wonder Food is a meal replacement supplement, supposedly containing all of the required nutrients for survival. Wonder Food also appears to be the only food source available in UnLondon. Despite the claims by various posters around the city that Wonder Food contains all the nutrients you need and completely restores health and vitality, examination of this substance has revealed that it is, much like the rest of UnLondon, unsuitable for sustaining life. Tests have confirmed that Wonder Food is a synthetic starch gel heavily enriched with various minerals, vitamins, fats, and bulking agents, and it contains artificially engineered DNA helix structures. While it does contain all the elements required for short-term survival, consuming the product for longer than 6 weeks will result in severe malnutrition and eventually scurvy. Further tests have shown that Wonder Food also contains psychoactive properties. The porridge contains a mixture of unknown molecular compounds which, through regular consumption, make subjects calmer, less anxious, and less likely to resist authority. It also seems to have been engineered to cause withdrawal symptoms that set in if a person stops eating it, symptoms which include headaches and depression. Foundation personnel are forbidden to consume Wonder Food, but the substance is highly attractive to instances of SCP-1678-B and 1678-C. Like most things in UnLondon, the quality of Wonder Food varies wildly, with some dispensers putting out a product that is so degraded that it can cause sickness, deformities, or even death in the consumer. But strangely, the Foundation has also recorded a type of unknown colorful mollusk which feeds on spillage from the Wonder Food dispensers. At present, UnLondon is only partially contained. Mobile task forces Tau 4 and Epsilon 6 have succeeded in establishing a perimeter around the Hyde Park district, where they have managed to stop any incursion from SCP-1678-A. Even though this is the only area that is fully under Foundation control, explorations have been conducted of buildings outside that perimeter. The investigations are vital for the Foundation's main purpose in UnLondon, which is figuring out who built it and exactly what kind of event this underground mirror city was meant to prepare for. The interior of the Natural History Museum yielded particularly strange insights into the purpose of UnLondon. For the most part, the museum is close to how it appears in the above ground, but with one key difference. The task force investigating the museum discovered an exhibit called The Fall of Man, exactly where the Darwin wing should have been. The exhibit, as its name suggests, details the apocalyptic scenario that would have theoretically driven people underground into UnLondon. But to everyone's surprise, its dioramas and displays didn't depict an asteroid impact, plague, or nuclear Armageddon. To the Foundation Task Force members, the scenes of destruction depicted in the exhibit were far more familiar. They recognized the reptilian form of SCP-682, the ordinary-looking brownstone basement door that serves as a gateway to SCP-2317, and, most chillingly, the imposing many-eyed figure of the Scarlet King. These were only some of the known Keter-class SCPs depicted in the museum exhibit. It was clear that even though the SCP Foundation hadn't built this city, whoever did knew a lot about the SCP Foundation's activities. It's believed by the Foundation that whoever or whatever created UnLondon still resides in the Houses of Parliament, and the ultimate goal of the task forces is to infiltrate the building. But in order to do that, they will first need to find where the bobbies are made and halt their production. It's believed that Bryson's home for the poor is where they originate from, but it's unclear exactly where the materials to make them come from, nor is it clear just how they're produced. Ultimately, the Foundation's goal is to catalog the entire city, And once they have stopped the production of more bobbies, MTF Tau 4 and Epsilon 6 will storm the Houses of Parliament and contain whatever force has created UnLondon. But London is a very big city, and UnLondon is just as big. So there's no telling what else they might find exploring this bizarre location.
Guten Nachmittag, Freunde. Welcome back to SCP Explained. World War II is one of the most tragic periods of recent history, and perhaps the defining event of the 20th century. And not only was this conflict a horrifying atrocity that led to the deaths of 75 million soldiers and civilians, it was also a time of immense weirdness. The American military created the Ghost Army, a tactical deception unit that used tactics as crazy as inflatable tanks and wooden airfields to distract and confuse the Axis powers. They also temporarily renamed hamburgers Liberty Steaks in some places in order to avoid the German connotations of the original name. The Polish military even gave an actual bear the rank of corporal, and this bear, named Corporal Wojtek, became a decorated military hero. But enough about SCP-5464. We've got bigger fish, or, well, bears, to fry. One party in this war had more than their fair share of alleged World War II weirdness: the Germans. Nazi scientists were performing horrifying and nonsensical experiments, from medical experiments on prisoners to attempt to create large and ridiculous weapons known as Wunderwaffe. One of Hitler's right-hand men, Heinrich Himmler, took up residence in a castle where he and his men allegedly performed odd occult rituals, and even the Lebensborn, a deranged eugenics experiment intended to produce a huge stock of Aryan children from SS member fathers. And if all of that seems certifiably insane, which for the record, it is, then the stuff the SCP Foundation has been suppressing will make your toes curl. We've already covered the fact that even Hitler himself, copied by Stalin with the help of Sarkic wizards, is now classified as SCP-2430 and held in containment by the Foundation. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We can thank a shady group known as the Obscura Corps for the creation or utilization of a lot of these artifacts and entities. As we discussed in our video on the immortal Hitler clone, the Obscura Corps was Nazi Germany's answer to the SCP Foundation, though their highly unethical methods were much more like a racist version of the Chaos Insurgency. This group of loyal occult thugs was charged with hunting down any anomalous artifacts that would give Germany the edge it needed in the war effort. Think the kind of guys going after the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail while trying to kill Indiana Jones. Of course, seeing as Germany still lost the war in the end, they weren't exactly the best at their job. But that doesn't mean they don't have a long list of bizarre and often dangerous anomalies to their name. Starting with SCP-2367. This is a device so infamous that not even the SCP Foundation has been able to fully suppress knowledge of its existence. Popularly known as Die Glocke, meaning the bell in German, this device has been a popular staple among time travel and alien conspiracy theorists. And those theorists honestly aren't that far from the truth. The bell is a spatial and temporal transportation device created by the Germans during World War II in hopes of teleporting spies, soldiers, and equipment behind enemy lines. And terrifyingly, the machine actually worked and was able to transport multiple SS officers. However, there is one detail that makes Die Glocke a little less terrifying. Everything they transport materializes several hundred feet over the top of their intended destinations. In the case of all transported SS officers, this means that they appeared high in the air and immediately fell to their doom like Wile E. Coyote. SS officers hitting the ground at incredibly high speeds is always a delightful mental image. As funny and incompetent as this is, there is actually one major threat posed by SCP-2367. The SCP Foundation raided a number of Obscura strongholds during World War II as a part of an operation called Operation Hammer. During one of their raids, a large group of around 1,400 German soldiers, along with a huge number of large vehicles and pieces of military equipment, fled via Die Glocke. They all disappeared through the teleporter, and according to all Foundation estimates, they're likely to manifest again in 2031. They'll rain down from the sky near Berlin, crushing everything below under the weight of their own vehicles and bodies. A mobile task force, nicknamed Himmler's Housekeepers, has been mobilized to clear the area and reduce all possible civilian fatalities when this happens. German engineering at its finest. right? But hey, let's give those mad Nazi inventors another chance to prove themselves with the second, even bigger Wunderwaffe designed by Albert Speer, German Minister of Armaments and War Production under Adolf Hitler. It's SCP-044, the biggest artillery weapon ever created. It's a ginormous cannon, 251,000 kilograms or 251 metric tons in weight, and so huge that it required 2 freight locomotives at the same time to transport it. The Nazis were big fans of absurdly huge weapons, whether they were cannons, giant planes, or the world's heaviest tanks, almost as though they were compensating for something. But there is one thing that makes 044 special to the point of being anomalous. It can fire literally anything. When something is placed inside the firing chamber of SCP-044, the weapon will transform into a powerful explosive payload, with its explosive power being proportional to the size of the objects placed inside. Even crowds of people could be transformed into deadly explosive rounds. One of the largest objects that the Foundation fired off was the Administrator's diesel pickup truck, weighing 8,900 kilograms. How on earth did the Nazis ever lose with a weapon like this on their side, right? Well, much like so many of their other weapons, it was a victim of their own greed. Weapons this big just couldn't be moved practically, and were easily routed by less powerful but more maneuverable Allied weapons. Next, we have another anomalous Nazi failure, though this one was intended to give life rather than take it for once. The anomaly in question is SCP-2936. A secret Nazi military and research base hidden in the cold reaches of Antarctica. The place has likely been abandoned by humans since the 1950s, but there is one entity that still rolls through the halls on rumbling caterpillar tracks. An advanced sentient robot nicknamed the Stahlmutter, or Steel Mother, powered by a mysterious power source shaped like an ambiguous glowing symbol on its chest. Who would have guessed that the Nazi design sensibility was tacky? The Stahlmutter is there to maintain the Glasgerbarmotren, or glass wombs, where a number of desiccated human fetuses are held. The intention of this base was clear. Much like the Lebensborn project we mentioned at the start of the video, this was a controlled breeding program supported by the Nazis' deranged philosophy of eugenics. But after the war, when the Nazis attending the base presumably fled for their lives, there was some kind of accident that destroyed the seal of the glass wombs, allowing the amniotic fluid to leak out and killing the fetuses inside. But due to a malfunction, the Stahlmutter's diagnostics were way off, and it never realized that its mission was futile. When researchers attempted to inform the machine of that fact, it simply replied,
"The kinder lie on the bottoms of the Glasgerbarmotren. They are unmoving like the dead soldiers, but the kinder are not soldiers, and the kinder are not under mission. And the chemical, physical, and mechanical parameters of the Glasgerbarmotren are all at optimal values. Therefore the kinder are not dead. The Stahlmutter loves the kinder always. Good kinder will grow strong and brave and wise. The Stahlmutter loves the good kinder."
The next anomaly wasn't created by the Germans or the Obscura, but it was utilized by them. It's SCP-3457, a collection of strange rituals, artifacts, and workings known as the Rites of Solomon. If the correct artifacts are collected and the rites are performed, the executors of the ritual have the ability to control the distribution of magic or thaumaturgy across the globe. It's Obscura's plan to perform the rite and remove the ability to perform thaumaturgy from anyone who wasn't of Germanic descent, giving them German magic supremacy. This was the end of the infamous Seventh Occult War, which was the major geopolitical event that led to the formation of the Global Occult Coalition, coinciding roughly with what we civilians consider World War II. Luckily, through a collaboration between the SCP Foundation and the precursor to the Global Occult Coalition, the Allied Occult Coalition, Obscura was defeated before they could complete the ritual and grant magical supremacy for the fatherland. Since the defeat of Obscura in this pivotal battle, organizations like the SCP Foundation, the GOC, and others have sworn to keep the different artifacts necessary to perform the Rites of Solomon safe and secure. Some are kept in public museums as part of a global sting operation to catch remaining members of Obscura, who hope to someday attempt the dark ritual again. Some of the items remain in the hands of scattered Obscura remnants to this day. Okay, so arcane historical rites are a little complicated. Let's hop back to another wacky Wunderwaffe to cleanse our palate. Something like SCP-3721. Remember when we said the Germans were kind of obsessed with having the biggest, gaudiest guns back during World War II? They were also apparently ahead of their time in this regard, as in 1943, they were able to construct a fully operational orbital cannon and an earthbound computer bank that allowed them to operate its strikes remotely. But even scarier than a giant orbital cannon controlled by the Nazis is a giant orbital cannon that's completely out of control. That's right. The computer on the ground is autonomous and decides the best time to make its strikes by monitoring news broadcasts of current events. So if you feel like a day full of bad news is unpleasant, just be grateful that it wasn't the day that activated the massive death satellite looming up above. Maybe the idea of land being bombarded by an orbital cannon freaks you out a little. Understandable, really. Maybe you'd prefer to flee to the water for safety, but you're not safe from the Germans there either. And we're not talking about them stealing your beach chairs while you're going for a swim. We're talking about SCP-4217, which was once known as the Bismarck, which was a German World War II battleship before it was appropriated by a giant cephalopod that not only has giant dangerous tentacles, but also has the ability to use all of the ship's weapons against you too. What will you think of next, Germany? And finally, perhaps the strangest Obscura Wunderwaffe of all, a dangerous semantic weapon known as SCP-3878. It's a deadly word-based infectious cognitohazard created in a single patient zero via a strict regimen of psychotropic drugs, electroconvulsive therapy, and at the conclusion of the program, trepanation to create an extremely strong anti-concept within the subject's mind. When this person is activated with a trigger stimuli, this will begin to spread the cognitohazard, causing a lethal effect to anyone who doesn't speak the subject's native language fluently. The first infectee would have been German if the plan came to fruition, so all but fluent German speakers would have been killed by the infection. It's a solid plan, by which we mean a Metal Gear Solid plan. Incidentally, killing the victims of this cognitohazard was never actually the plan. They just hoped to erase other languages. Though given that the Nazis weren't exactly people of high moral fiber, we'd be willing to bet that they were probably a-okay with killing anyone who wasn't a fluent speaker of German anyway. And there you have it. A taster plate of the wackiest Wunderwaffe and the sinister soldiers and scientists who made them a reality, or at least tried to twist them to their own gain. It's honestly lucky for all of us that the Nazis during World War II were a gang of arrogant and incompetent buffoons, because if that weren't the case, we'd probably be speaking German right now. Though if you'd like to live on the bright side, at least we'd be safe from SCP-3878.
If you've ever studied ancient Egypt in your history class, then you're probably familiar with the way they buried their pharaohs. When a king of Egypt died, their body would be entombed in a huge sarcophagus, usually after being mummified. Mummification was the process that the ancient Egyptians used to preserve their dead, safeguarding a corpse with special chemicals and the application of cloth almost like bandages. This was done to keep cadavers from decaying, usually because of the belief that this would carry over into the afterlife. And it wasn't just the Egyptians that practiced mummification either. Mummies of human beings or animals have been found on almost every continent in the world. Sometimes a body can even be accidentally mummified through exposure to extreme cold, lack of oxygen, or other environmental factors that help keep the deceased preserved. Fun fact, the oldest recorded mummy isn't even one left behind by the ancient Egyptians. It is actually a naturally mummified severed head, estimated to be 6,000 years old. It was unearthed in South America in 1936. Yes, corpse preservation techniques can indeed be strange, but none are stranger than SCP-1176, also known by the nickname, the Mellified Man. Now, as you may have already pieced together, the Mellified Man is a mummified corpse, but not quite like the ones you would expect to find buried in the pyramids. Estimated by Foundation researchers to have been a man in his mid-30s when he died, SCP-1176 is a corpse that has degraded so much over the centuries that it has made DNA examination impossible. According to some of the SCP Foundation's best minds, SCP-1176 is possibly of Arabian ancestry, and thought to have passed away sometime during either the 10th or the 11th centuries AD.
This is certainly not your ordinary mummy, and it definitely isn't like the kind you'd see in a cheesy black and white horror movie or on an old episode of Scooby-Doo. SCP-1176 is absolutely, undoubtedly dead by all clinical definitions. It doesn't show any signs of breathing, and the processes of blood circulation or metabolism have long since stopped. However, despite the decay suffered by the rest of the body, SCP-1176's brain seems to have remained intact for almost 10 whole centuries. Not just intact, but active. The Foundation's researchers have confirmed that the brain has a constant level of electrical activity, consistent with people experiencing Stage 3 non-rapid eye movement sleep, known colloquially as deep sleep. So, a mummy with an active albeit dormant brain. How does an ancient culture manage to achieve preservation like this? Alien technology? Cryogenic sleep chambers? Suspended animation? No, not quite. SCP-1176 exists in its current state in part because the body has been mummified. Now, this was a process a lot like mummification, but instead of wrapping them in cloth, a mummified man or a human mummy confection was created by submerging a dead body in honey. According to historical records, elderly men in Arabic countries would sometimes willingly volunteer themselves for this process. Why? Because the goal was to turn their bodies into a healing confection. In other words, an elaborate sweet delicacy created from a preserved corpse. That's right, ancient cultures had candy made from dead people. All the information the Foundation has gathered about SCP-1176 seems to point to the body being one such mummified man. When extracting the remaining bodily fluids from the corpse, instead of fighting blood or other normal substances, Foundation researchers discovered that SCP-1176 was full of a viscous gold-colored liquid that they designated as SCP-1176-1. Further testing of this fluid revealed it to be, you guessed it, honey. Specifically, it was a type known as clover honey, made by a species called the Anatolian honeybee. This stuff was everywhere, filling SCP-1176 entirely. So much so that honey was even coming out of the body's pores. This is due to the nature of the mummification process. Typically, before death, a person who had offered to sacrifice their own body would stop eating any food. Instead, their diet would consist solely of honey and nothing else. They would even bathe in it, submerging their entire body in the substance inside and out until their sweat and even their feces were pure honey. This honey-only diet would eventually kill the donor, and their corpse would be placed in a stone coffin, which was also filled up with even more honey. After approximately 100 years, what would be left was human mummy confection, a honey-based candy of sorts that could be then sold at street markets for a high-value price. Why was it so expensive? Well, not just because it was literally made from a dead person, but also because this confection was believed to possess rare and powerful healing properties. Everything from the common cold to broken bones was said to be cured by it. Despite it leaking out of SCP-1176, the honey doesn't seem to ever run out, even when tested under varying conditions. It seems like the mummified man actively produces more of the sweet golden substance, acting as the source rather than a container with a finite amount. And yes, it is still edible after several centuries. In fact, it contains an abundance of essential vitamins and nutrients. According to the Foundation's testing, the honey produced by SCP-1176 can suppress the feeling of hunger for up to 18 whole hours, and there are no long-term side effects for most that eat it. However, this is not the case for everyone. The Foundation has learned that any person without the blood type AB positive will have a severe allergic reaction should they consume any of SCP-1176-1. The symptoms include acute hemolysis, which means the red blood cells won't break down properly, and renal failure, which is when the kidneys stop functioning. This all results in death for most of the subjects without AB-positive blood who were fed SCP-1176-1. The symptoms for these unlucky people were the same as receiving an incompatible blood type after a transfusion. In 1985, the SCP Foundation launched a raid on a facility in Asmara, Eritrea. which at the time was owned by a group called the Mana Charitable Foundation. Agents had been dispatched to this facility after various rumors and reports that pointed to this location being the source of a strange honey substance. This anomalous liquid was being shipped to a number of areas in Ethiopia that had been stricken with famine. Pretty easy to guess where the Mana Charitable Foundation got all that honey, right? The problem was, because SCP-1176-1 caused adverse effects on people without AB-positive blood, a considerable amount of civilians had died from consuming it. Hence, the SCP Foundation was forced to step in. When SCP-1176 was first uncovered, the body had been stored inside a large stone sarcophagus, as was part of the ancient practice of creating a mellified man. There was also a copper pipe and spigot installed by the Mana Charitable Foundation to extract the honey from within. The lid, sides, and inside of the sarcophagus itself had a number of Egyptian hieroglyphics inscribed within. These were mostly spells and ceremonial texts written as a way to protect the individual that was to become the mellified man. There were also inscriptions written in a dialect that was an early precursor to the Arabic language. However, these sections had been replaced with updated versions in classical Arabic. One of these read, Abdallah ibn Salah ibn Ayyub ibn Nasir, 15th son of the great Sheikh Illegible, was put to the fast of honey on the 1st of Rajab in the year of the Hijra 3 Illegible, and died on the 15th of Ramadan. The great Imam al-Yusuf has sealed him within the ancient vessel, marked with the signs decreed by the ancients to ferment in honey for 100 years, and bring aid to the people in time of need. Much like a headstone used to mark the grave of someone who has passed, the sarcophagus that SCP-1176 was in featured a passage commemorating a man who gave his life and body to heal others. Sounds nice, right? But there was another inscription, written elsewhere on the stone sarcophagus, which translated a dire warning. Beware, Imam, for the mark of Iblis is upon this one. According to the rest of the second inscription, the tomb containing SCP-1176 had been opened before. During a time of great famine, Imam al-Malik had ordered it to be opened so that SCP-1176-1 honey could be used to feed the starving people. Jars upon jars were filled with the anomalous golden liquid and brought to the sheikh, the ruler of the land, as well as sent to the people suffering from the lack of food. However, the very next day a number of these people fell ill, stricken by a terrible fever that ultimately claimed their lives. Only the sheikh, his brothers, and his sons, who had all eaten the honey, survived. Any others who hadn't been killed by the fever accused the sheikh and his family of sorcery, and these surviving subjects attempted to destroy the body that had produced this cursed nectar. But when the sheikh's people found the mellified man, they witnessed in horror as the body stood upright, dancing around as it screamed and taunted the people. Al-Malik declared that the devil himself sent an evil spirit to corrupt SCP-1176. The honey confection was meant to be a means of healing, but it had been corrupted. The sarcophagus was then sealed, and the inscription on it finished with the following caution to any that found it. May God strike down any who would break these seals. Countless centuries later, once the SCP Foundation had recovered SCP-1176 and the sarcophagus containing it, they began testing with the mellified man. Their goal was to determine how much of the SCP-1176-1 honey the ancient corpse could produce, perhaps in the hopes of using this substance as a form of hunger-relieving field ration for their operatives. Removing the body from its sarcophagus, Foundation researchers placed SCP-1176 on a metal grate, designed to drain the honey as it was produced instead of allowing it to build up. Over the course of several hours, more and more honey seemed to be produced, beginning at a rate of almost a liter per hour to almost 56 liters every hour. But then, after 10.5 hours of producing what seemed like an endless flow of honey, something unexpected happened. The deceased body of the mellified man, dead for hundreds if not thousands of years, woke up. Foundation staff detected a spike in brain activity. If you cast your mind back to earlier, you'll remember that SCP-1176's brain had managed to survive and stay intact long after it should have decayed. The mellified man opened his eyes and immediately started to wildly flail around. He made a number of distressed sounds, the long dead body trying to crawl towards the outskirts of the testing chamber. Thanks to so many of its organs and muscles having withered away over the years, SCP-1176 was barely able to see or understand its surroundings. It couldn't speak, Not properly anyway, given that its tongue had long since decayed. The Foundation's personnel moved in to try and restrain the ancient and now animated body, hoping to sedate it before SCP-1176 caused any lasting damage to itself. Eventually, staff were able to force SCP-1176 back into its sarcophagus, slamming the stone lid back in place and trapping it within. They could hear the once human creature screeching and vocalizing from inside, bashing against the inside of the stone coffin with its head and limbs. It took 3 whole hours of this for the mellified man to return to its usual state, by which time its ancient bones were fractured beyond repair. SCP-1176 is a sad tale of a man who had willingly given his life to be a source of healing for people in need. He allowed himself to be mellified, turning into a confection that could bring an end to famine. And yet somehow, this was corrupted and turned into something that spread fever and pestilence. For now, the mellified man sleeps, but his brain is still alive inside. While he might be asleep, he may never be able to rest.
Hello, SCP Foundation personnel! Welcome to Cognitohazards and You, episode
Redacted.
This video series is intended to teach you about the protocol surrounding the various cognitohazardous anomalies currently within Foundation containment. When you know better, you do better, and both you and the secrets of our great organization can stay safe. And as anyone familiar with a good cognitohazard can tell you, knowing really can make a difference. Today's episode is about the unique and dangerous SCP-2316. Before we begin, repeat after me, and be sure to speak clearly into the microphone in front of you. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. A little louder, please. Thank you. In order to be educated about the following SCP, you must pass a vocal examination with a cognitive resistance value of no less than 14.5. Through this video presentation, you will need to repeat the phrase to ensure your score does not drop below the approved threshold. In the event that you fail the test, stay calm and remain where you are until medical staff can retrieve you. Remember, safety is a top priority when observing cognitohazards. The safe way is the only way. You're a cog in a very important machine, and we wouldn't want to have to terminate you now, would we? One more time, please. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Very good. Remember that. You do not recognize them. No matter what you might think you see, your thoughts can be very unreliable when you're around SCP-2316. According to our files on the matter, SCP-2316 refers to an anomalous phenomenon identified in a small-town lake. It appears as a collection of human bodies floating in a group on the surface of the water. The exact number of corpses is unknown, but it has been estimated to be anywhere between 45 and 200. Though the bodies belong to individuals, many researchers theorize that the bodies in the water, which you do not recognize and you have never recognized, share a collective consciousness. They function, it would seem, with a hive mind of sorts. The bodies do not act on their own, but as one. Now, where does the cognitohazard come into play? It would seem that anyone who looks at the bodies in the water or learns too much about SCP-2316 as a whole begins to believe the corpses floating in the lake are people they recognize. Perhaps they remember their faces from childhood or high school. Whatever the case may be, they become convinced that the bodies in the water are familiar and that they must approach them. No matter how familiar they might seem, however, you do not recognize the bodies in the water. If a person attempts to enter the lake, reaching out to whatever instances of SCP-2316 they think they recognize, more bodies will begin to appear. The more bodies appear, the more familiar faces seem to manifest, and the deeper the person will venture into the lake. Eventually, the person is lost within the sea of bodies, likely drowning beneath the surface, or simply becoming one with the hive mind, until they too are one of the corpses there. None of the individuals who wandered into the lake in search of an old friend or classmate have ever been recovered. There have been no attempts to search the lake for their bodies, as it is unknown what effect SCP-2316 would have on the team assigned to such a task, though we can guess that the outcome would likely be extremely negative for all involved. Those who do venture into the lake simply disappear, never to be seen again.
If you look too long at the bodies in the lake, perhaps their faces would surface alongside the rest. But it's best not to think about that. After all, we do not recognize the bodies in the water. Foundation personnel are not allowed to approach SCP-2316 under any circumstances. The lake is only permitted to be observed via dummy probes outfitted with video and audio recording equipment. No one is permitted to observe any footage or audio files collected unless they pass through a screening for resilience to cognitohazardous anomalies. The lake that holds SCP-2316 has been fenced off and is patrolled by guards with no prior knowledge of or exposure to SCP-2316. Anyone who attempts to approach the lake and break through the boundaries of its quarantine will be seized and taken to Site-33 for examination. Anyone who comes within 50 meters of the lake is considered lost and presumed dead. Repeat after me slowly and clearly into the microphone. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Good! I almost believe you. Let's continue. Only one Foundation officer that entered the lake containing SCP-2316 was ever stopped before they could be lost. Their name has been stricken from any official records, and you do not need to know it. Their identity does not matter. What matters is the interview they gave following the incident, conducted by Dr. Harrison in his office. Dr. Harrison asked the anonymous officer if they felt compelled to enter the water by an invisible force, as if pulled in. They rejected this concept entirely, insisting that they entered the water of their own free will. They wanted to see the bodies, who appeared to them as their friends. They wanted to hear what the bodies were saying. Upon entering the water, they saw the faces of their friends. Other faces were unfamiliar, but became more familiar the longer the officer stared at their features. These were faces they had known their entire life, but something about them was just a little bit wrong. It was like the face of someone in a dream, where you can tell they are someone you know, and you can even identify who it is supposed to be, but something about them does not quite look right. Your mind could not perfectly put their face together from memory, even though the feeling of familiarity remains. The faces in the water, peering up through the darkness below, were like those dream-addled memories. The faces in the water did not open their mouths, but somehow they spoke to the officer just the same. They spoke of who they were and asked for help. They asked to be seen, to be touched. They spoke of the Foundation, accusing us of covering up their deaths and keeping the world from remembering what happened to them. At this point in the interview, the subject became agitated, yelling at Dr. Harrison and refusing to be quiet. Guards intervened, holding the subject still as they fought, yelling at Dr. Harrison, repeating over and over that they could hear the bodies speaking to them. Every single one. The interview ended when the guards removed the subject from the room, taking them to the amnestics department to have all memory of the bodies in the water erased from their mind. Then they were forgotten once more. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. Did you repeat it? Good! We do not recognize the bodies in the water. We can't. The motivations of SCP-2316, if it has any at all, are largely unclear. There are those on the research staff that theorize the hive mind or collective consciousness of the bodies is not malevolent in nature. It is, they believe, simply trying to make sure that a tragedy that occurred in that lake is remembered. Perhaps many lives were lost to an anomalous force in that lake, and the impact of that massive tragedy left behind an impression on the location. This impression manifests in the form of bodies, spontaneously appearing in an impossibly well-preserved condition. The cognitohazard of SCP-2316 is not intended to kill anyone or take them, but rather to force strangers to remember the people who lost their lives to the lake. This sense of familiarity, whether it is false or not, ensures that the dead will not be forgotten or left alone. After all, no one deserves to be left alone. Though there have been lives lost to the cognitohazard according to the Foundation, it is understandable why the bodies would want to be recognized, to have someone, somewhere, know who they were, to have someone remember their names. Jeremiah Feynman, Arthur Scott, Denise Clark. Where was I? Oh yes. Repeat after me once again. I do not recognize the bodies in the water. I do not recognize them. I do not. But that's a lie, isn't it? I do recognize them. How could I not? I know them. They're my friends. Do you recognize them? Look at their faces. Don't fight the memories. Look into their eyes. The class of 1975. They were supposed to graduate that fall. They were just kids. Group of innocent kids lost to the dark and deep. What happened to them? I can't quite remember, but I know that it mattered enough for the Foundation to keep the secret, and I know that somehow I survived, but I shouldn't have. I should be there with them. I should be there. There isn't much time. I can hear the guards coming to retrieve me, their footsteps thundering down the hall. I failed the test and the alarm has gone off. They think I'm lost, but I'm not. I've never been less lost in my entire life. I've finally woken up to the truth. I remember. I have to go. I have to return to the lake. Fall of 1975, they went for a swim. My friends, they're calling to me. I can hear them so clearly even from so far away. Their cries for help ringing in my ears, their voices curling around me, pulling me to the edge of the water. The guards will come for you too. They'll know you've seen this. They'll call you compromised. They'll say I succumbed to the effects of the cognitohazard. They'll say you did too. You'll fail their little tests and they'll say that makes you weak and broken, but you cannot listen. They're lying. It's not a hazard. It's a scream for help. They're screaming and the Foundation keeps covering it up. They won't let us find them and they won't tell us why. I have to go back so we can be together again. There are signs posted all around the lake. Danger, drowning hazard. Those are a trick. It's to keep me out, to keep the truth from me. The barbed wire fences around it, it's just another trick. I'll climb over it, rung after rung. I don't care if the barbs tear my clothes or pierce my skin. It's worth it for the truth, for the memory. And once I've climbed to the top, I'll be able to see. There, through the fog, I can see their faces. Their lips parted in a constant cry. Their eyes wide looking for me. My friends, my family, every face unlocking a memory long buried. I know them all, and I must go further. I can't turn back now. I have to wade into the water, let its chills soak into my clothes, down to my bones. One step, then another, deeper and deeper. The water lapping at my ankles, my knees, my thighs. The deeper I go, the more sure I will be that this is where I belong. The water will engulf my chest, my neck, until my feet no longer touch the ground. I will be lost in it, water flooding into my mouth, pouring into every opening. I will let my body sink down, down, down to the bottom, where they've been all this time, nestled in the dirt and the dust. They've been so patient. But it's finally time. They're ready to be remembered, to be seen, to be found. They're waiting for me, and they're waiting for you too. Can you hear them? I'm going now. You have to find me. You have to follow me. Don't let the guards stop you. Don't let them wipe it all away from your mind. Fight, break free, and find the lake. Hop the fence, make your way into the water. You can't leave me there to fade away, floating in the cold with the rest. Can you hear us? We're waiting.
In June of 1985, Mark Johnson and his wife of 10 years, Sophie, were on vacation in Myrtle Beach having a great time. While they relaxed on the sand, Sophie decided to take a picture of her husband for their scrapbook. So she pulled out the Polaroid Supercolor 645 that she'd bought specifically for the trip. She pressed the button, waiting for the picture to print, pulled it out, and shook it. What she expected to see was a shot of Mark lying on his beach towel. What she got was a picture of her husband in the arms of his secretary. They say that a picture speaks 1,000 words, but this particular camera takes pictures that are worth even more than that. When developed, the pictures taken with this normal-looking Polaroid camera reveal the innermost desires of the person being photographed. Welcome to the story of SCP-978, the Desire Camera. The main reason the Foundation keeps SCP-978 under wraps is due to its use as an easy form of blackmail. All anyone with access to the camera would have to do is snap a few covert photos, and they'd have instant dirt on the world's most powerful people. To further stop this camera from falling into the wrong hands,
The containment guidelines strictly forbid the use of the camera for anything other than simple documentation, and all uses of it must be thoroughly logged and checked. So, now that you know what the camera does, it's time to look at what kinds of strange and mysterious photos it's taken. After all, who doesn't want a chance to gain insight into the minds of the Foundation's most famous and dangerous inmates? First, to serve as a control, the team took a photo of a blue office chair. No change was recorded, proving that the camera didn't work on non-anomalous inanimate objects. Some of the earliest tests of the camera were the photos that the research team took of each other. One by one, the doctors and their assistants were photographed in neutral poses, smiling as if for a completely normal photo. Then they waited while the photos developed like normal Polaroids. Most of the research team had minimal changes in their photos. One was shown slouched in his chair drinking from a flask. One was shown in her civilian clothes, getting ready to go home from work. One doctor was in the exact same pose, but with a different colored tie on. The last assistant photographed, however, had their picture come out wildly different than how they were posed. Their desire revealed by the camera was so shocking that it had to be redacted, and the assistant was placed on temporary psychiatric leave. Following this first successful test, the doctor in charge of the project ordered a second round of tests to be conducted, this time on a series of D-class personnel. A picture of one D-class, who was photographed while eating in the cafeteria, showed up as scuba diving on vacation with his wife and child. He was allowed to keep the picture afterwards. Another had a similar result. He was photographed in a neutral pose like the members of the research team had been, and when the picture developed, the D-class was seen holding a smiling baby, whom he identified as his 1-year-old daughter. After that, the results of the SCP-978 test started to get a little, well, weird. A notoriously twisted D-class known as 7294 was photographed in his cell, and when the Polaroid developed, he was in the same cell playing a cello made out of a dismembered mannequin. D-217-017 was a late-stage victim of SCP-217, a virus that turns organic matter into metal. You would assume that her innermost desire would be to be cured of her disease, but when she was photographed in her cell, the resulting Polaroid showed her completely made of metal, kneeling and praying at the base of a black obelisk. One D-class, who had been rendered comatose and was on life support, was photographed in their hospital room. Their picture showed them as only a limp, deflated skin in their photo. The photograph of another D-class, who had become increasingly listless and apathetic since their integration into the D-class program, resulted in a picture that was exactly the same as they appeared in reality, except the light in their cell was slightly dimmer. Intrigued by these results, the research team wanted to see how the camera would react to SCP-148, a type of metal that blocks the psychic properties of other SCPs. A helmet was made from the material and placed on a D-class who was given an adult magazine to read while his photo was taken. When the photo was developed, it was extremely blurry. Upon close analysis, the figure of the D-class reading the magazine could still be made out, and around him the faint images of several nude people could be seen. The research team wanted to see if the results were the same when the camera was used on animals. Photos of the lab mice and rabbits showed them eating or mating in their respective Polaroids. A zebra finch was shown escaping its cage, while a guard dog and its handler were shown playing fetch in the park. When cockroaches were photographed, there was no difference visible between the picture and reality. But the most exciting test results came when the camera was tested on other SCPs. For a few of the SCPs tested, there was no visible difference between the picture and reality. This was the case for SCP-173, the Sculpture, SCP-343, nicknamed God, SCP-014, an immortal man who is, over time, being turned into concrete, and SCP-063, the world's best toothbrush. When SCP-035, better known as the Possessive Mask, was photographed in its glass case, the picture showed an unidentified individual wearing the mask, sitting on a throne and surrounded by 3 masked corpses. The team took a picture of SCP-043, a haunted copy of the White Album that was being interrogated while on a turntable. In the picture, the album was being returned to its sleeve. They then photographed SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, standing in his cell. In the picture, the Plague Doctor is hugging an unidentified small child and surrounded by instances of SCP-049-2. when they took a picture of SCP-050, a mischievous statue of a monkey reading a book. The result was predictably playful, given that SCP's history of pulling pranks. The photo that came out of the camera showed the camera itself, with another picture of itself coming out of the developing slot. Microscopic analysis revealed that this recursive photography kept going until the cameras in the pictures of the other cameras were too small to see. The team next photographed SCP-053, the young girl, and the photo was taken as the young girl was drawing with crayons in her cell. In the picture, she was riding through a sunny field on the back of her friend SCP-682. SCP-053 and SCP-682 were even wearing matching bows, dresses, and pink nail polish. When they took a picture of SCP-096, the Shy Guy though, the picture showed SCP-096's cell with nothing in it. SCP-085, the living 2D sketch known as Cassie, was photographed tinkering with a drawn car. In the developed photo, Cassie was engaged in the same activity, but both she and the car were now three-dimensional. The team took a photo of SCP-106, the old man, emerging from a wall within his cell. When the photo developed, it showed the old man roaming a wheat field near an old farmhouse. From the porch of the farmhouse, an older woman is greeting SCP-106 with open arms. They also took a photo of SCP-168, a sentient calculator sitting on a table in its containment cell. In the picture, a teenage boy is seen doing complex math homework using the calculator. Next to him on the table are thick textbooks with titles like Complicated Math, Difficult Math, and Math You Need Your Calculator For. The photo of SCP-261, a vending machine that dispenses snack products from alternate universes, showed the SCP in its usual hallway, almost completely buried in coins. SCP-507, an otherwise normal man who unwillingly teleports between dimensions, was photographed while eating in the cafeteria. The developed picture showed him dressed as a Foundation researcher talking to other researchers. When SCP-682 was photographed, floating in its containment tank, the resulting picture showed the SCP surrounded by the corpses of all of the Foundation staff and mauling the person who had taken the photo. A researcher's note accompanying this photo reads, "Well, that was predictable." Yes, it was. Just for the fun of it, the team also tested the camera's effects on a few other Foundation personnel. They took a photo of Dr. Bright while he was arguing with Dr. Clef. The picture that came out showed a tombstone engraved with the words, "Jack Bright, resting at last." The team also took a photo of Dr. Clef as he stormed out in a huff following the argument. Given that Clef's face cannot be photographed, they were curious as to what the results would be. The picture showed little difference compared to reality, save for the fact that Clef's head was replaced by an image of a hand making a rude gesture. Upon closer examination of the photo, the team also realized that there was a young girl in the background who, strangely, had cloven hooves instead of feet. A young SCP-166 perhaps. The team then took a photo of Dr. Fisher holding his pet hamster. Contrary to expectations, the picture revealed not Dr. Fisher's desires, but the hamster's, showing the hamster sleeping peacefully in its cage, with Dr. Fisher nowhere to be seen. As you can see from these test logs, the effects of the camera are, well, inconsistent, with some photos showing very immediate, simple whims, and others showing the subject's deepest and most secret desires. While the researchers working with SCP-978 seemed like they had a lot of fun getting to peek into the minds of all their coworkers and test subjects, there's no telling what kind of pandemonium could be unleashed if someone on the outside ever got a chance to use it. Thankfully, the camera, which has been classified as safe for obvious reasons, is kept securely in security locker HJ12 at Site-17, which means none of us have to worry about our own pictures taken by the Desire camera leaking out. But if someone did get the camera out and took your picture, what do you think they'd see? Captain Francis Pike leads his team across the Arctic tundra. In the distance, they can see the city of Audapaupadopolis. It floats 7.8 kilometers above the ground and is filled with mysteries and treasures beyond even the Foundation's wildest dreams. It is September of 1933 when the SCP Foundation first catches winds of something odd going on in the Arctic. a British airman named Sir George Danson flies over the North Sea heading to Norway. After he lands in Oslo, Danson begins ranting about a floating city. The Foundation immediately disseminates contradictory information and manipulates the story to include that Danson had been drinking during his flight. So everything he is saying is probably the result of a drunken hallucination. While SCP agents spread lies, the Foundation immediately launches an investigation. The team that is sent to the Arctic confirms what Danson claims to have seen. There is indeed a floating city there. Now Captain Pike and his team stare at the island in the sky as their hot air balloons are filled behind them. The Arctic wind whips up small snow tornadoes as the temperature plummets. The balloons are ready, and Pike orders his men to board. They lift off from the ground and pull their parka hoods over their heads to protect them from the Arctic blasts at high altitudes. Pike and his team slowly drift over the city of Audapaupadopolis. When they are somewhat in the middle of the floating island, the hot air balloons are lowered and the team lands without incident. To their surprise, the exploratory team finds that the floating city has its own microclimate, which is much more pleasant than the frigid Arctic. They remove their winter gear. "Proceed with caution," Pike tells his men. "We have no idea what we're going to find in the city." The architecture is clearly old, but not exactly like anything on Earth today. It seems to be a conglomerate of ancient Mesopotamian design mixed with the design features of several other cultures. Many of the buildings that line the stone streets are crumbling, and the city overall is in ruins. Pike leads his team down a series of roads. Scientists photograph and take notes of the city for Foundation records. SCP agents check around every corner to make sure there is nothing hiding in the shadows. The team comes to a crossroads. "Halt!" Pike shouts. Standing in front of them is an old man with long gray hair and a white beard. He seems to be of Middle Eastern descent. "Hello, friends," the old man says. "Welcome to Audapaupadopolis. I am the caretaker of the city. I've been expecting you. Please follow me." The old man turns around and proceeds down the causeway. Pike hesitates for a moment. "Stay alert," he whispers to the agents behind him. Then he begins to follow the old man down the street. As Pike walks, he takes in the grandeur that the city once held. The roads are as wide as the main avenues back in London, while the buildings, although in shambles, still retain some of their ancient beauty. Pike begins to walk a little faster to catch up with the old man. "What happened here?" he asks. The man turns his head. "All will be revealed soon, Francis Pike. Just be patient." "How do you know my name?" asks Pike. The old man smiles. They turn another corner and in front of them is the Grand Hall. It seems to have survived whatever catastrophe befell the rest of the city. Pike stops and stares up at the massive structure with his mouth ajar. "Come," says the old man, as he motions the SCP team to follow him up the steps into the main hall. "Let's eat." The old man prepares a simple meal, but one that fills the stomachs and satisfies Pike and his men. At the conclusion of the meal, Captain Pike approaches the mysterious man. "I feel like you deserve an explanation as to who we are and why we're here," Pike says. The old man raises his hand. "You are from the Foundation," he replies. "I already know about the Foundation and you, Francis Pike. I have been waiting for you to arrive for a long time. There are things I need to show you in the city. There are old secrets and ancient relics from the past that you were sent here to learn about." Pike looks at the man and squints. "What are you talking about? How could you know we were coming? And what relics are you referring to exactly?" The old man grins and places a hand on Captain Pike's shoulder. Pike feels a longing emotion well up inside of him. It's as if he has been waiting for this moment his whole life. "Come," says the old man. "You and your men need rest." He shows Pike and the exploration team to several rooms down the hallway where they can set up for the night. The rooms are large and comfortable. "Sleep well, Francis Pike. Tomorrow I have much to show you." The old man leaves the room and proceeds down the hallway to his small, humble chamber. The next morning, Pike and the other SCP agents are greeted by the rising sun and the old man waiting for them on the steps of the Grand Hall. He leads them through the city. "There are 3 temples I wish to show you," the old man says to Pike. "You will notice that their architecture and imagery differ from most of the other structures in the city. Make sure you listen very carefully, Francis Pike, as what you're about to learn could save the universe. Or perhaps destroy it." Pike is speechless. All he can do is nod his head. The old man leads the SCP agents to the middle of the city where the 3 temples reside. Each one has its own unique iconography and style. The art seems to reflect important events in history or subjects that hold significance in the past. The old man proceeds to walk towards the first temple. Upon entering the structure, there is a mural of two naked people watching the horizon from a tree line. Behind them are a wolf and bear that seem to be protectively standing guard. Directly opposite of this picture is a painting of a figure holding a flaming sword on a hill. As Pike and his team enter the main hall, they are welcomed by a gigantic mural depicting the sun rising over Audapaupadopolis. "This is where the Temple of Sunrise gets its name," the old man says, gesturing to the mural on the far wall. Below the sunrise is a golden man holding a spear with a silver point. He wears a shining crown. Pike can't help but notice that the man in the mural looks similar to their guide, just a lot younger. Perhaps it's his son or a relative, Pike thinks to himself. Above the sunrise is a dragon with green eyes. Engraved across the dragon's body are the words, "They will know what is." The other walls contain images of the same golden man. In one picture, he stands at the foot of a throne with a naked woman wrapped in snakes behind him. On another, the golden man sits on the throne with an iron crown hovering above his head. Behind him are monoliths of 5 figures. One is made of gears and steel. Another is made of flesh and blood. The third is made of ice and stone. The fourth is made of stars. And the final is made of eyes. The SCP agents in the room begin to buzz with excitement. They start recording everything they see. "We must continue on," the old man says. "There isn't much time left." Pike nods and orders a small team to stay behind to continue documenting the Temple of Sunrise. The next building they enter is the Temple of Sunset. Within the walls are maps of different towns and landscapes. One of the maps is Audapaupadopolis itself. The words, "The Lands of Men," are scrolled over the map in the entry hall. The old man stops at the opening to the main gallery. "Prepare yourself, Francis Pike. What you are about to witness will not be pleasant." They head into the next room where the temperature immediately shoots up. "What the hell is producing all of that heat?" Pike asks. There is nothing but crumbling walls and fallen columns visible in the room. One of the scientists hollers from the back of the group. "Jesus! Sir, I think you need to take a look at this!" He walks up to Pike and hands him a pair of thermal imaging goggles. Pike puts them on. "Damn," Pike mutters. With the thermal lenses on, he can now see a massive humanoid entity lying dead on the floor. His body is so large that it covers the murals on 3 of the walls. Pike notices that the temperature in the room is still continuing to increase as the dead giant is radiating heat. The Foundation classifies the entity as SCP-4840-B. It has 6 arms and 6 legs, each connected by metal chains to iron flails at the end. A sigil has been brandished into the middle of the entity's chest. "What is that?" Pike asks. The old man just shakes his head. "One of the many who have fallen," he responds. The old man points to the only wall that is not blocked by the massive body of SCP-4840-B and frowns. The golden man is depicted here as well. Pike can't help but feel there is some sort of connection between Audapaupadopolis, the old man, and the golden figure he keeps seeing in the murals. In the Temple of Sunset, the golden man sits atop a white horse with his iron crown resting on his head. Behind him is a massive army of men and women, holding axes and swords. Across from the golden man and his army are legions of green and gray figures with 6 eyes dressed in brilliantly colored clothing. An intense lightning storm appears to be amassing in the distance. Captain Pike looks up to the ceiling to see it covered in stars. However, he does not recognize any of the constellations. "Is the golden man I keep seeing you?" But before Pike can finish his question, the old man cuts him off. "We must be going!" He turns and exits the temple. Pike does not want to push the old man. He seems to be a wealth of knowledge, and the only way to learn more about Audapaupadopolis and what it all means. They exit the Temple of Sunset and continue to the final structure in the middle of the city. The old man leads Pike and the rest of the SCP agents to the smallest temple of the 3. He stops just outside of the doorway. "This is the Temple of the Night," he proclaims. "What you see on the surface is deceiving. This temple goes deep underground. It contains a labyrinth of passages that one could get lost in forever, so please be careful." "Are you coming?" Pike asks. "No," responds the old man. "I do not enter the Temple of Night. I have my reasons, which do not concern you." Pike nods, and then signals his men to follow him into the temple. He notices that many of the murals in the passageways and rooms of the Temple of Night depict the same image of a massive tree in the middle of a vast forest. In each instance of the tree, there seem to be red lights surrounding the base, human-like figures hanging from its branches, and structures wrapped in vines surrounding the trunk. The hallways are illuminated by some unknown light source. It is as if torches line the walls and give off a dull yellowish glow, but there is no fire to be seen. Embedded in the walls are sarcophagi, with intricate carvings in their stone casings. Pike can't help but notice scratching sounds coming from within the sarcophagi, as if someone, or something, is trying to claw its way out. The exploration team reaches the innermost chamber of the temple. There is a staircase in the middle of the room that descends below the floor. However, its entrance is covered by rubble from a collapsed wall. Suddenly, an SCP agent runs up to Captain Pike. "Sir, I think you should see this." Pike follows the man back through a series of twists and turns. He stops at a closed door. The Foundation seal is carved into the wood. It seems as if the carving has been there for a long time, which is impossible since they are the first SCP team to explore the city of Audapaupadopolis. The agent pushes open the door and Pike steps in. He is astonished by what he finds. It seems he has been transported to an abandoned Foundation site. All of the lights are off, but he can tell that it is some kind of central command center due to the screens and setup of the space. Painted in black block letters on one of the walls is Site 000000. Pike quickly exits back through the entryway and shuts the door behind him. He looks at the SCP agent who brought him into the room.
"Secure this door and make sure no one gets in or comes out. Do I make myself clear?"
Pike orders his men to exit the temple. After everyone comes out, Captain Pike walks over to the old man who is sitting on the steps outside. "Did you find what you were looking for, Francis Pike?" the old man asks. Captain Pike shakes his head. He stares down, eyes wide, at the stone steps of the temple. "I see," says the old man. "I have something else to show you, Francis Pike." The old man leads Pike to the grand hall that they had slept in the night before. He brings him through a series of passageways and down a staircase. They stop in front of a large door.
"Open it,"
the old man whispers. Captain Francis Pike walks up to the door and pushes it open. On the other side is endless darkness, from which he hears his own voice speaking to him through the ether. Pike begins to walk towards the darkness. The old man places his hand on Pike's shoulder and pulls him back. Then he shuts the door.
"The light of the world has long since left that place, and mortal man can no longer walk it," says the old man. "I needed to show it to you as a warning. Things are not always what they seem, Francis Pike."
That night, Pike lies awake staring at the ceiling of the grand hall, thinking about the old man. He sits up and begins jotting down his thoughts. In his official report, he identifies the old man as SCP-4840-A, but in his journal, he can't help but refer to him as a friend. There is something about the old man, something special. Pike knows there is much more to his story, and the story of the flying city of Audapaupadopolis. A team of archaeologists uncovers a giant ceramic vase in the ruins of an ancient Greek city. They carefully brush away the sand and debris that surrounds it. The head archaeologist grabs a ladder and places it gently against the 8-foot-tall vase. "I'm gonna see if there's anything inside," he says. The archaeologist climbs the ladder and peers over the lip of the ceramic vase. The inside is completely black. "I can't see anything," he shouts down to the rest of the team. He reaches his arm into the pot to see if he can feel anything. A couple of seconds later, he releases a yelp of pain.
"Something bit me!"
he yells. The archaeologist pulls his hand out of the darkness and climbs down the ladder.
"Is there an animal inside?"
a fellow archaeologist asks. But before the question can be answered, the ceramic vase begins to shake. Thousands of tiny creatures resembling a rat mixed with a pug flood out of the top of the vase. They start clawing and biting the archaeologists. The men run away screaming in terror. Many are consumed by the wave of creatures. Others are overwhelmed as they try to scramble up the ruins to safety. Only minutes after the lead archaeologist stuck his hand into the ceramic vase, the screams are silenced. The creatures wander aimlessly around the ancient Greek city. The SCP Foundation hears of the incident and sends a team to investigate. They classify the anomalous vase as SCP-019. When they arrive on the scene, the thousands of creatures that were manifested from the vase are found dead.
These entities are designated SCP-019-2 and incinerated before any tourists visiting the archaeological site see the corpses. The extraction team examines the vase itself. It seems like a normal, although very large, ceramic from antiquity. The scientists put in charge of securing SCP-019 are Dr. Light and Dr. Vox. "Be careful," Light says. "We don't know what the connection is between the vase and these creatures. It seems as if they came out of it, but our instruments aren't detecting anything inside and there's no way they could have all fit into that thing anyway." Dr. Vox, who is closely examining the vase, comes to the same conclusion. They take a step back as the extraction team prepares to put ropes in place to move SCP-019. A rope is thrown over the vase. Part of it lands on top of the lip. Instantly, an instance of SCP-019-2 appears from the ceramic. It begins running around, clawing and biting anything it can, but is eventually captured by Dr. Vox. "Well, now we know where the creatures came from. We'll bring it back to the lab for further study," the doctor says as he hands the creature off to one of the agents. The ropes are secured and the team begins to move the vase, but with every moment, another SCP-019-2 instance appears from the artifact. "This is gonna get really annoying," says Dr. Light. "Let's put the whole damn thing in a mobile containment chamber and let those little creatures run on top of each other rather than us chasing them around." "Agreed," replies Vox. A containment pod is brought in. The team quickly moves SCP-019 into it, as instance after instance of SCP-019-2 manifests from the vase. The doors to the pod are sealed. Light and Vox watch hundreds of small creatures run around inside. They bring the vase secured in the containment pod back to the SCP Foundation site, where it can be studied further. It is transferred to a containment chamber where it is observed by Light and Vox. After a few days, SCP-019 slows the manifestation rate of the SCP-019-2 creatures. When the vase was first secured, agents were ordered to shoot the creatures on sight, but the number of bullets being used was unreasonable, so they resorted to flamethrowers. The doctors decided the best course of action is to put SCP-019 into a room hooked up to an incinerator. This way, if too many creatures are manifested, they can all be burnt to a crisp with the push of a button. Dr. Vox can't help but think that this must have been what Captain Kirk felt like on the Starship Enterprise when it became infested with tribbles. Eventually, it is discovered that as long as SCP-019 is kept at 0 degrees Celsius and no one goes near it, the object only manifests one creature per hour. This is much easier to manage than the hordes of SCP-019-2 instances that came out of the vase previously. Doctors Light and Vox observe and collect data on SCP-019 through a glass viewport that looks into its containment chamber. The incinerator is turned on at least every 24 hours just to clear the room of creatures. When they are not working with the vase itself, the doctors examine SCP-019-2 entities to try and understand what they are and what they want. They capture one of the creatures and put it in a reinforced pen. Light and Vox provide the specimen with live chickens for food and as much water as the creature can drink. The noises that SCP-019-2 makes sounds like muffled sets of words. When linguists are brought in, they determine that the vocalizations are phonetically similar to ancient Hellenic languages. This is consistent with what was spoken at the ancient Greek city, where the ceramic vase was found. The doctors gave the specimen a series of puzzles to solve. It can make its way through a maze to find a piece of chicken, but when it is given opportunities to show its sentience, SCP-019-2 always falls short. Dr. Light and Dr. Vox determined the creatures are about as intelligent as lab rats. One of the most peculiar things is that SCP-019-2 instances only live for less than 48 hours. No matter how much food, water, or care is given to the creatures, they drop dead in a day or two after being manifested. Dr. Light moves one of the dead critters to an operating room where it can be dissected. She cuts down the middle of its stomach with a scalpel and peels the skin and muscle away. "Well, that explains that," she says to the other researchers standing in the room. "The muscles seem to degrade rapidly from the instant SCP-019-2 is manifested into our world. There is basically no digestive tract other than a mouth and throat, but the most surprising thing is the complete lack of internal organs." Dr. Vox pushes the intercom button from the viewing room in which he is observing the procedure. "What do you mean there are no internal organs?
It must have some sort of brain and cardiovascular system. Yeah, but that's about it, Dr. Light responds. There appears to be a very simple central nervous system with a brain the size of a pea and a heart, but nothing else. This creature can't metabolize the food it eats or filter out toxins, and I have no idea how it breathes. We need to run more tests. With each new specimen that's examined, the results are the same. The creatures aren't very intelligent. They die in under 48 hours, and they lack pretty much any internal organs. Then one day, everything changes for the worst. The guard posted to watch over SCP-019 notes something strange occurred during his shift. Without fail, the vase manifests an instance of SCP-019-2 every hour, but around 3 a.m., no creature was generated, or at least that's what appeared to happen. The guard puts on protective equipment and enters the room to get a closer look, but there is nothing there. He locks up, records the anomaly, and returns to the viewing glass to continue his watch. Over the next hour, the vase manifests a creature as if everything is back to normal. The next day, Light and Vox arrive at work to find everything in chaos. The power in different sections of the facility is failing. It is as if something has gotten into the ducts and is chewing through the wiring. A team of agents uses thermal imaging devices to track down the entity that is causing all the mayhem. They bring it back to the research lab. "Take a look at this," the agent says, pointing at an empty operating table. He hands Dr. Light his thermal imaging goggles. Without them, there appears to be nothing on the table, but when she looks through the device, she can see an instance of SCP-019-2. "My God," Dr. Light whispers. "They're evolving." The creature is exactly the same as all the others, except this one is invisible. Suddenly, an alarm goes off and red warning lights turn on across the facility. Light rips off the goggles and looks at Dr. Vox. "We need to get back to the vase now," she yells. They sprint out of the operating room and down the hall. As they turn the corner, they hear gunshots and the spray of fire from flamethrowers. On the other side of the corridor where SCP-019 is contained, there are agents battling with thousands of instances of SCP-019-2. The flamethrowers that had been so effective at killing the creatures now appear useless. It is as if the creatures have evolved some sort of protective skin to combat the flames. "Oh no," gasps Dr. Light. "We gotta get out of here." She grabs Dr. Vox's shoulder and drags him with her as she runs down the hall. Behind them, the scream of agents can be heard. They are quickly muffled as thousands upon thousands of SCP-019-2 creatures overwhelm them. Light glances behind her to see what is happening. What she finds is a wall of creatures rushing towards her. There must be millions now. It seems like SCP-019 was tired of being contained by the Foundation and has sent an invasion force to escape its captors. "We're not going to make it!" Vox yells. He stumbles and falls to the ground. Dr. Light skids to a stop and turns to go back for him, but it's too late. The wave of SCP-019-2 is closing in. She watches in horror as Dr. Vox is consumed by the mass of creatures. She turns and continues to run. The exit is in sight. Dr. Light makes a dash towards the door. She can feel the tiny feet of the creatures clawing at her heels. She gives it everything she's got and accelerates, putting some distance between her and the millions of SCP-019-2 entities. Dr. Light slams through the exit door and immediately closes it behind her. She manages to slide the metal locking bar into place. The impact from the wave of creatures against the door sends her stumbling backwards. She is safe now. As Light lays on the ground panting and staring at the door, she thinks to herself, "Well, they'll all be dead in a couple of days, and then we can try again."
Have you ever had a nightmare that you're running down a long, dark hallway, getting chased by something you can't see? The thing behind you isn't fast, but that doesn't matter. You can't run forever, and the thing knows it. It is a patient predator. It toys with its food. At first, you move with speed and rhythm. The metallic scraping noise behind you grows quieter. You run and stumble through the dark. Your muscles start to ache and your lungs burn. Your pace slows. It's still coming. You can hear the scraping getting louder. You start to panic. It's completely dark. You don't know where you're running or even what you're running from. All you know, as you bump against the walls and the sharp corners that rush towards you, is that you can't run forever. You trip, fall, and pain explodes through your legs as your knee shatters on the concrete ground. That scraping is getting louder. You can barely breathe. You can't run anymore with your injury. There's no way to stop what's coming. There is no escape. The scraping is right behind you. You scream, and then you wake up. Your heart is pounding like thunder in your chest, and your sheets are soaked with sweat, but you're safe. You're out of those awful dark hallways. But what if this wasn't just a nightmare? What if this scenario was real, and there was no escape from the horror chasing you in the darkness? That's what it's like to have a close encounter with SCP-1918, a sadistic sentient object that loves playing twisted games with its prey. But this monster never plays fair, and even worse, it's always just a simple door away. It may even be hiding behind a door near you right now, waiting to start a game with its new playmate. But soon you'll understand why some doors should never, ever be opened, and why some games are better left unplayed. SCP-1918 is an anomaly with two parts: SCP-1918 itself and SCP-1918-2, the monster's underground lair. The duo are a match made in hell, as the chambers and hallways of 1918-2 are perfectly tailored to 1918's violent hobbies. Nobody knows how long this anomaly has been operating, but it's probably behind countless disappearances. After all, 1918 has a habit of breaking its toys. The nightmare began in a small town in Maine with a population of only 226 people, but that population was about to get lower. People in the town began to report strange noises at night, a droning metal-on-concrete scraping noise, like someone dragging a lead pipe along the ground. At first, people just ignored the sound. It was all in their heads, or maybe just a faulty oven or a washing machine on the fritz. Anything that would allow them to forget about the noise and get on with their daily lives. But the noises were coming from below. They could be heard out on the streets, most audibly near manholes and sewer grates. People started feeling unsafe in their homes. The noises were spooking animals and children. People were losing sleep. That scraping they all tried to ignore was beginning to get to them all. Letters, emails, and angry phone calls to the town council were piling up. Something had to be done before the whole town went crazy with fear. The mayor authorized 4 utility workers to investigate the source of the noise at a local sewage treatment facility. Considering the scraping was loudest near the sewer grates, everyone just assumed that whatever was causing all this must be connected to the sewers. 4 utility workers were sent to investigate the facility, only to find that the machinery on site was working just fine. The source of the problems must have been coming directly from the underground sewer lines themselves. The 4 workers, equipped with headlamps, descended into a long service tunnel that fed into the sewer system. As they passed deeper into the tunnel, the darkness around them became thicker. It was a tangible presence that drowned out the light of their headlamps, similar to the anomalous phenomenon exhibited by SCP-087. When the utility workers tried to turn back, they discovered another impossibility. It seemed that the tunnel behind them had become a solid concrete wall. They were trapped, but where? It was too dark to tell. Confused and terrified, the 4 men stuck together, attempting to find a way out. It was too dark to see their hand in front of their face, so all they could do was navigate slowly by feeling the walls around them. These walls felt old, crusty. There was a kind of faint metallic stench hanging in the air too, like old blood. Something horrible had happened here, and something horrible was about to happen again. All they could do was keep moving and try to stay calm. Eventually, after hours of pawing at the walls in the dark, they found an open doorway. One by one, they filed inside, only to feel blinded when bright white ceiling lights suddenly switched on. The room was all white and filled with pipes, large and small, running from wall to wall. Just then, one of the utility workers let out an ear-splitting scream and pointed towards the doorway. His colleagues turned and gasped in shock. There was something outside the door, and it was staring at them. The object filled up almost the entire doorway. It seemed like a demonic hobby horse, made from a black and white candy-striped metal pole with a crude plastic head on top. The head looked like a clown's with a wide, toothy grin, but no visible eyes. It was SCP-1918. The utility workers were frozen as the object leaned forward slightly and slithered into the room.
the bottom of the metal pipe scraping against the ground. It was the exact same scraping noise that had been haunting the concerned townsfolk up above. This was the thing behind it all, and as the object moved, its metal pole started to scrape words into the ground. Tick-tack-toe. None of the 4 utility workers were ever seen again. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to descend upon this quiet Maine town and pick up the pieces. All relevant officials were provided amnestics, and cover stories were created for the disappearances of the 4 utility workers. The Foundation also commandeered the sewage treatment facility that held the entrance to SCP-1918-2, replacing all key roles at the facility with undercover Foundation personnel. SCP-1918 was given a Euclid classification due to the fixed nature of its hunting grounds. And then the real research began. The Foundation soon made some disturbing discoveries. Entrances into the SCP-1918-2 area didn't follow any kind of logic. The hunting ground of SCP-1918 can be entered from almost any location, if you're unlucky enough. There are currently 9 known entrances, including 5 sewage grates, 3 utility shafts located in a sewage facility, and 1 toilet. And these are just the ones that the Foundation knows about. There are a huge number of ways to enter SCP-1918-2, but to this day, nothing has ever been able to leave. SCP-1918-2 is contained 20 meters below the streets of this unassuming Maine town. Personnel, aside from Foundation-approved D-Class guinea pigs, are refused entrance. Researchers have mapped out the layout of 1918-2 through seismic imaging of SCP-1918's movements. There are 18 identical room pairs in SCP-1918-2, or 9 compound rooms. Rooms are differentiated between a 1-room and a 2-room by crude carvings on the floors outside of the individual rooms. SCP-1918-2 is symmetrical, with half-a-meter wide paths circling each compound room. The only deviation to this construction are the location of entrances on the sides of each individual room, which vary randomly while the location is active. What exactly does SCP-1918 do in this private little maze? It plays games, of course. Its 2 favorites, as indicated by the words it scrapes into the ground, are tic-tac-toe and memory. In tic-tac-toe, 1918 moves to each 1 room, leaving behind X markings on the floors if the room is not already marked with an O, in a manner similar to a game of tic-tac-toe. How a victim is meant to accomplish making a mark or understanding this process is unknown, as no aids are given. Blood is commonly used by victims to make their markings, hence the rusty smell in many of the rooms. In memory, the trapped victim is rendered unconscious by blunt force, presumably from SCP-1918. The subject regains consciousness in a random section of the facility. Success is marked by finding a 1-room identical to the central room. This event seems to possess a time limit, as the subject is pursued by SCP-1918 through the halls of the facility. The subject wins by marking the correct room with an O. What happens if you win or lose these games? It's important to note that SCP-1918 is very competitive and doesn't play fair. If you win, the object will merely accuse you of cheating and start a new game. This will happen again and again until eventually you lose. And what do? Well, take the horrifying encounter D-Class personnel member D-2934 had with SCP-1918. Wearing video and audio equipment, D-2934 was led into SCP-1918-2 by Foundation researchers. When he eventually found his way to the central room, 1918 challenged him to a game of tic-tac-toe. And against all odds, D-2934 won the game. But 1918 didn't take kindly to that. It accused D-2934 of cheating, carving its accusations into the ground before challenging him to a deadly game of memory. After hours of chasing, D-2934 eventually lost his mind and was backed into a corner by 1918. As the object made its way towards him, he panicked, ripped a pipe from the wall, and began smashing 1918's head. As the plastic cracked under the force of the blows, Foundation scientists could see real brains inside. D-2934 screamed, and the video feed cut off. When the video turned back on sometime later, 1918 stared into the camera with a different head mounted atop its metal pole, one that just a few hours earlier had belonged to the unfortunate D-2934. If there's one lesson to be learned from this terrifying anomaly, it's that there truly is no escape from SCP-1918. Gamma would never forget the horrific sight of SCP-5967. On the surface, she kept her nerve cool and collected, her finger ready to squeeze the trigger as her weapon stayed trained on the entity. But deep down, it turned her stomach. After all, how is someone meant to react when they see a thing like that? A mess of flesh and eyeballs towering above them, staring back through more retinas than any living creature has. She did not yet know it, but she'd still be seeing that disgusting pillar of musculature and eyes in her nightmares for months to come. And still, it wasn't even the worst part of the incursion. Far worse than seeing the 5-meter-tall eyeball totem, watching it blink its many lids at her, was witnessing what it had done to Alpha. Only moments before, Gamma's commanding officer had been in control of this situation, leading Mobile Task Force Lambda-5 into the meadowlands of East Rutherford, New Jersey. The mission should have been a simple smash and grab, the same old boring story their team had lived through countless times before. Pick up a high-value target, the leader of yet another cult practicing an anomalous religion, and bring him in for questioning. Gamma never could have expected that things would go this badly. The task force had arrived to discover Caesar Winters, the leader of a sect of Fifths operating in New Jersey. When Lambda-5 discovered him, Winters and his followers, locals who were all members of a group known as the Commune, were standing in a circle around an instance of SCP-5967. Standing at around 5 meters in height, SCP-5967s were piles comprised of mostly musculature and organs that resembled eyeballs, human eyeballs. Despite lacking a mouth, vocal cords, or any other conventional methods of speech, these pillars could still very much communicate verbally, although they had little to say besides spouting phrases and principles associated with the Fifthist ideology. Almost immediately, the plan to capture Winters had gone awry. It was almost like he expected the Foundation to arrive, like he knew they were coming. As the members of MTF Lambda-5 moved in, keeping Winters in their sights, the anomalous cult leader somehow turned the gaze of SCP-5967 onto Alpha. The team's field commander ordered Delta to open fire, taking out Caesar Winters in a single shot, but only for a moment. Another of the commune members kneeled over and began convulsing. A wound formed at the person's neck, and from it emerged Caesar Winters' face. It grew into a full-sized head, replacing that of the commune member, giving Winters a brand new body in moments. On Alpha's orders to stop Winters from hopping to more bodies, Gamma and the others in their team fired on the other cultists. Everyone was terminated. 15 seconds was all it took. Then they moved towards SCP-5967, and everything went wrong. The bodies started to convulse violently, as if some unseen hand was shaking them around like ragdolls. Gamma watched as they began to levitate, hoisted by their necks and floating towards the mobile task force. Not one of them knew what to do, keeping their rifles up and trained on the corpses. Each one folded in on itself, becoming compressed masses of muscle embedded with eyes. That was when the team lost Alpha. Something was happening to their leader. She had dropped her weapon and fallen to her knees. Immediately, Gamma moved in to help her commander, trying to pull her back to her feet, but Alpha was resisting, transfixed by SCP-5967. "It's her. She is lost deep in the cosmos and is angry with us for not helping her find her way back. She will kill us all, lest we lie in our brains and see her for who she truly is." Gamma watched as her team leaders rushed towards the pillar of eyes and licked it. The floating orbs of flesh and eyes that had once been people suddenly hurtled towards the members of MTF Lambda-5 at high speed. Gamma dove clear at the vital moment, performing a tactical role and managing to narrowly avoid being struck. Beta wasn't so lucky. Ready to retaliate, Gamma raises a weapon to fire at the floating remains, only to hear Alpha ordering her to stop. She had stopped licking SCP-5967, but whatever influence had compromised the Mobile Task Force leader hadn't relinquished its hold over her.
She grinned unnervingly as her eyes rolled back into her head. Don't you hear her voice? She is angry, but I can save you. I can save us. Let me show you, Alpha said, before charging at Gamma with her arms outstretched. In seconds before she could defend against her commanding officer, Gamma found herself pounced upon by Alpha. Grabbing a nearby rock, Alpha swung at her head and knocked Gamma's tactical helmet clean off. Pinning her down, possessed by some unknown anomalous entity, Alpha held open Gamma's eyelids and licked her eyeball. Gamma screamed in horror as Alpha looked up to the sky and yelled, "I can see you! I can see everything now!" The case of SCP-5967 is one of the stranger tales within the annals of the SCP Foundation's history. Their investigation that led to the discovery of these 5-foot-tall pillars of eyes and muscle originally began with a different intention. The commune had been making waves in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, the kind of waves that had caught the SCP Foundation's attention. The two leaders of this apparent cult were Salem Steros and Caesar Winters, both of whom seemed to be able to use SCP-5967s to take control of the local residents' minds. Anyone that they affected could be controlled remotely by either Steros or Winters, with a seemingly unlimited range and no known way of relinquishing their control over an affected person. Amnestic treatments, hypnotherapy, none of the Foundation's usual methods had worked. Undercover Foundation operatives working secretly within the Lyndhurst Police Department were the first to discover an instance of SCP-5967 right under their noses. Literally, the pillar of eyeballs seemed to have sprouted up right in the middle of the Lyndhurst police station. The Foundation sent in containment teams to secure the area and administer amnestics to witnesses. But just how were Steros and Winters causing these monstrous musculature monoliths to appear? Well, the pair operated a radio show together, known as the Reality Sync. The Foundation agents within Lyndhurst had been unable to track down exactly where they were broadcasting from. However, after the SCP-5967 instance appeared within the police station, the answer seemed to present itself. During the building's reconstruction, tapes of their radio show were recovered, seeming to suggest that the pair had been utilizing anomalous means to broadcast the reality sync from within the station itself, while keeping themselves concealed. The reality sync was a religious talk show, specifically focused on discussing elements of Fifithism with the audience and callers who phoned in to Winters and Steros' hidden studio. What exactly is Fifithism? Well, there's no easy answer to that question, unfortunately. Other anomalous cults and religions at least have a core tenet or belief at their center. Sarkicism is the worship of disease and decay, while Mechanites from the Church of the Broken God venerate technology. The beliefs of the Fifth Church are a little more interchangeable, however. They don't really have any defined theology or religious practices. Fifithism is often more just a collection of recurring ideas and motifs, the number 5, stars, and the belief in an external cosmic god, often a malicious one. In fact, if there is a defining principle of Fifithism, it's that it's an anomalous way of thinking that it can't really be understood. Practitioners of Fifithism are concerned primarily with transcending reality as we perceive it. They are highly interested in entities and anomalies that can warp and shape reality, to the extent of even being fearful of such beings. A lot of Fifithists seek to not only spread their influence to others through any means necessary, including brainwashing, but also hope to transcend humanity to a higher plane of reality, the fifth dimension. There, in theory, a person would cease to be a human being, and wouldn't even really be akin to a god or powerful reality bender. Instead, they would become something more vague, a concept, unable to be fully defined or to exist in reality completely. Fifithists follow this goal, presumably with the intention of saving humankind from reality-warping anomalies, and they'll use any infectious brainwashing methods at their disposal to bring as many people as they can into their way of thinking. This brings us neatly back to Caesar Winters and Salem Steros' radio show, The Reality Sync. This was the commune's, their particular sect of Fifithism's, way of spreading what they referred to as the truth. Based on the various fragmented cassette recordings of their show that the SCP Foundation were able to recover,
Both Steros and Winters believed in a many-armed goddess, referring to it as only she or her. They encouraged their listeners to pray to this entity and let her know that they were loyal to her. During one of their recovered broadcasts, the pair of Fithist hosts were even able to prank call the SCP Foundation itself. One junior researcher Jones was contacted by the two men and ridiculed for his association with the SCP Foundation. But after a few jokes at junior researcher Jones's expense, Steros and Winters began to insidiously implant ideas of Fithism in the researcher's head. They referred to this as giving Jones the truth, something they both intended to do for all of their listeners in order to save them. When asked what they really meant, Winters and Steros made vague allusions to the truth being an infinite knowledge that only she could bestow. Jones had no idea who she was meant to be.
Our guiding light, our creator,
Salem described, before adding,
the very thoughts that should be infiltrating your head right now.
It seemed that through this call, the two hosts had managed to successfully embed their Fithist concepts into the mind of junior researcher Jones, and they weren't about to stop there. During another call on their show, both hosts spoke with a Wallington, New Jersey resident named Wendy Ricefield, who was already a self-proclaimed Fithist. Steros and Winters talked Wendy through a ritual to learn the truth, involving her drawing sigils on the walls and floor of her home and lighting candles. The phone line picked up wet squelching noises coming from the other side, the splintering of wood, and Wendy screaming for help as she tried to run from her home, only for something to drag her back inside. Eventually, the Foundation made the executive decision to step in and deal with the situation in New Jersey directly. Steros and Winters' operation was getting out of hand. More and more people in the surrounding area were being brainwashed into believing in Fithist concepts and compelled to complete bizarre rituals. Sending a team in to apprehend the cult leaders, Foundation personnel discovered Salem Steros and numerous other members of the commune. They had gathered at an instance of SCP-5967 that had manifested in Wallington, the same place that Wendy Ricefield had been from. Steros and his Fithist followers were discovered holding hands and standing in a circle around the anomalous pillar of eyeballs, as well as approaching it and licking SCP-5967. The members of the commune were rounded up, and most were sent to be kept in isolation at Site 9. However, Salem Steros was brought to Site 83 for questioning. Junior researcher Umar Hadid conducted an interview as to the exact nature of the goddess Her that Steros and Winters often referred to, and the anomalous rituals the pair had been involved with. Salem was less than cooperative. He demanded to be set free in the interest of saving people by spreading the truth with Caesar. However, he did reveal some key information about Her. According to Steros' claims, she was a goddess actively meddling with reality and influencing human actions. He told Hadid that if he killed the junior researcher right there, it would be because she willed it. Sometime before, both Salem and his cult co-leader Caesar had been stargazing in the Meadowlands, a remote field in East Rutherford. That's when they had allegedly heard her voice and being told the truth. This reality-warping goddess was intending to return home, but that way was broken. So according to Steros, she needed their help. This was the reason he and Winters began creating instances of SCP-5967. The eyeball pillars apparently acted as beacons, like a GPS signal allowing her to come back. The pair and the rest of the commune were attempting to prove their loyalty to her, in the hopes that they would potentially be allowed to transcend reality, in accordance with the Fithist principle. Salem Steros was remained into SCP Foundation custody and kept detained in a containment suite surrounded by 3 Scranton reality anchors. Shortly after, the members of MTF Lambda 5 were dispatched, heading to the location Steros had inadvertently revealed during his interrogation. Their mission was to arrest Caesar Winters, who remained at large after the leader of Lambda 5 was compromised. Eventually, Gamma was able to contact the Foundation, who sent a containment team as backup. They secured the surviving MTF operative along with the infected team leader, Alpha, and the instance of SCP-5967 on the scene. Gamma was offered medical treatment and presented with a Silver Lion badge for her efforts in the field, along with a 2-week vacation as a reward. That did little to stop the nightmares, though. She wasn't the same, and neither was Alpha. After 2 long weeks of psychological screening, and no further hostile or anomalous activity, Alpha was interviewed by junior researcher Hadid. During their discussion, Alpha, real name Cassandra Sandy Danofsky, described that she could still hear voices in her head, rambling about the truth, fifism, and eyeballs. Amnestic treatment wasn't helping. Suddenly, someone within the Foundation played a clip of Caesar Winters' voice over the facility speakers, taken from one of his and Steros' radio broadcasts. It triggered an instant paranoid reaction from Sandy, followed by her opening her mouth and revealing something growing inside. Another eyeball. Some kind of post-hypnotic suggestion or other form of brainwashing had affected her, and she began exhibiting anomalous behavior. "Tell me, Hadid, are you a fifthist now?" she asked the junior researcher. "Are you ready to see the truth?" Hadid rushed out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Pacing around the room, Sandy started drawing strange sigils of unknown origin on the floor and walls, lighting a candle through anomalous means. Then there came a bright flash of light as a four-legged entity appeared and attacked Alpha. The two merged, causing her body to change until it was unrecognizable. Well, as human anyway. Standing in the interrogation room where Sandy had been standing was a contorted mass of flesh and muscle, with multiple eyeballs staring out from it. She had turned into another instance of SCP-5967. They all had. They were people. Steros and Winters had made beacons out of living people. Cast your mind back to the height of the Cold War. The ever-accelerating nuclear arms race brought us closer than ever before to making the nightmare of nuclear Armageddon a terrifying reality. The two main parties in this conflict are the United States and Soviet Union, each amassing huge amounts of nuclear warheads and jumping on any available advantage they can over their enemies. What you may not know is that in order to detect an impending attack from the United States, the Soviets developed what would become known to the West as the Dead Hand. But this experimental piece of technology also had another name, SCP-1984. It is no secret that the Soviet Union feared the threat of US nuclear strikes and invasion just as much as the US feared an attack from them. So SCP-1984 was created to act as a deterrence mechanism, specifically against secure second strikes. Secure second strikes were both a deterrent and overwhelming concern during the Cold War, referring to a country's ability after suffering an initial nuclear attack to still retaliate, firing on their enemy and causing untold damage with their own arsenal of nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union knew that any action they made that could be perceived as an attack on United States soil would be threatened with nuclear retaliation, and that if they fired first, America would return fire and potentially annihilate them with a second strike. SCP-1984 was to be an automated system that would activate in response to the destruction of the Soviets' main command and control structure. Given that the Dead Hand was created during the 80s, you might be forgiven for expecting a nuclear detection system built at this point in history to consist of various sensors connected to a computer network. But you have also probably already realized that if this was the case, then the Foundation wouldn't be so interested in it. In actuality, SCP-1984 is a fully autonomous entity rather than a network of sensors for detecting incoming nuclear strikes, or a computer capable of initiating a second strike. Perhaps what makes the Foundation more interested in the Dead Hand is that it is both self-aware and linked simultaneously to every single one of Russia's nuclear launch sites. Not only this, but SCP-1984 also has direct access to every single one of the atomic weapons stockpiled by the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and is capable of launching intercontinental ballistic missiles at a moment's notice. In short, SCP-1984 could very easily and horrifyingly quickly trigger an all-out nuclear war, resulting in the extinction of all life on Earth. No wonder the Foundation considers the Dead Hand such a massive threat. SCP-1984 itself actually consists of the preserved remains of a Russian soldier by the name of Sergeant Marat Chernikov, who was killed during the Soviet-Afghan War in 1982. Most of the official documentation of Chernikov's existence has been expunged by the Russian Federation, and he is only referred to in fragmented documents recovered by the Foundation that refer to a Project December. These remains serve as the location of a semi-sentient consciousness that has been classified as SCP-1984-01. When it remains dormant and is not interfered with, SCP-1984-01 has the ability to receive and process any signal broadcast to it, and is able to decipher information combined in any signal it picks up. However, when global military tensions start to climb, especially when those tensions affect the Russian Federation, or what were once the satellite states of the former Soviet Union, the entity begins to manifest itself in the physical world, and usually in various strange and different ways. SCP-1984-01 has been known to appear in the real world in forms such as a humanoid outline or a bright red specter taking the shape of a child with its legs cut off. Regardless of which shape it appears in, it is when the dead hand manifests in a more physical form that the wider scope of its abilities become clear. As mentioned previously, it can influence and even launch nuclear weapons, overriding their command systems and bypassing launch sequences. After appearing fully, SCP-1984-01 will travel at speeds of up to 140 kilometers an hour, directly to the nearest military installation capable of launching intercontinental ballistic missiles. Once it reaches its destination, SCP-1984-01 will immediately attempt to override the necessary systems to initiate a launch. After firing missiles at their predetermined targets, SCP-1984-01 will hastily travel to another facility housing nuclear ordnance, repeating the process until it has successfully launched all of Russia's atomic weapons. When engaged, the physical manifestation of SCP-1984 is highly aggressive, and will lethally defend itself against anyone that it observes trying to interfere with it or stop it from causing a nuclear launch. The entity has displayed the ability to disrupt the nervous system, causing excruciating pain and debilitating damage to human beings. Its only known weakness, if any, is a susceptibility to microwave radiation. Although exposure to this does not seem to cause any lasting damage to SCP-1984, instead only temporarily disorienting its physical form. As for the origins of SCP-1984, the Soviet Union's official liaison with the SCP Foundation offered some clarity on this. Ironically, during early 1984, the liaison, a doctor named Sergei, described information regarding the dead hand as being of grave importance to the continued survival of the human race. Seeing as he was referring to an enemy that could single-handedly launch the Soviet Union's entire nuclear arsenal, he certainly had a point. A top-secret conference was held in Sarajevo between the Foundation's O5 Council and officials from both the USSR and the United States, using the 1984 Winter Olympics as cover, avoiding too many questions about several nations' high-ranking state officials being in the same place at once. The O5 Council was then given full, in-depth information about the dead hand, something they had previously assumed was a more conventional form of nuclear deterrence. SCP-1984 was far more, and worse, far out of the control of the Russian government. It was revealed that the entity had been designated outside the original specifications given to those who developed it. Initially, the Soviets had intended for the dead hand to be solely used as a secure second strike response. If the leaders of the Soviet Union were killed, SCP-1984 would react in kind to Russia's enemies, launching back all of the USSR's nuclear missiles in retaliation. This is more likely where the dead hand nickname comes from, hearkening to the idea of a dead man's switch. Picture that you had been mortally wounded by your worst enemy, shot in the stomach and laying on the ground, rapidly bleeding out. You know that there is no chance you will survive, but you cannot afford to let your enemy get away. What they don't know is that you rigged the entire building around you both with explosives. With your dying breath, you activate the detonator, assuring your own and your enemy's mutual destruction. Kaboom. Then curtains for both of you. The pressing issue, and the reason this secret summit between the USSR, USA, and SCP Foundation was held, was that SCP-1984 was no longer interested in just waiting for Russia to be attacked and only reacting after the fact. Instead, the entity's physical form was trying to preemptively strike at the enemies of the motherland, attempting to activate nuclear launches and send atomic weapons to destroy the United States, France, West Germany, and the People's Republic of China. In other words, the dead hand was eager to get a head start at causing total nuclear annihilation, not to mention potentially killing millions and reducing target countries to little more than irradiated craters, awash with deadly nuclear fallout.
Both the Soviet Union and the United States begged the SCP Foundation to intervene and contain SCP-1984, and under the direction of the O5 Council, they stepped in to take direct control of the situation, establishing new containment procedures in the hopes of keeping SCP-1984 from hitting as many launch buttons as it could find. The embalmed remains that seemed to create the manifestations of the Dead Hand entity were held securely in an armed containment complex near Verkhoyansk, part of the Sakha Republic within the Russian Federation. SCP-1984 was placed within a standard humanoid containment cell, which was itself held within a Faraday cage, a type of enclosure constructed with or covered in conductive material designed to block electromagnetic fields. This was done to block any external broadcast signals from reaching SCP-1984, and thus causing it to manifest its other form if it learned of an impending attack on Russia, even a fictional one, perhaps as a part of a television broadcast. As part of the Dead Hand's containment, all signals broadcast near its cage are to be monitored, and only broadcasts featuring doctored information would reach the entity. Thankfully to the work of the SCP Foundation's Information Control Team, SCP-1984 is drip-fed a stream of carefully fabricated information. Using on-site equipment and facilities, a team of military historians, economists, actors, and Soviet media specialists, the Information Control Team have created an ongoing narrative wherein the Cold War never ended. Through falsified radio and television broadcasts made to look like era-appropriated news organizations, they managed to keep SCP-1984 convinced that the nuclear stalemate between the Soviet Union and United States is still ongoing. Unfortunately, sometimes information from the real world is able to bleed through. An incident involving SCP-1984 occurred on August 8, 1984, and almost brought forth a full-scale nuclear war. While preparing for a campaign speech, the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, uttered the following joke.
I am pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes.
Naturally, thousands of media outlets reported on this, but signals of those broadcasts, including recordings of the president's remark, made their way to SCP-1984. Foundation researchers were both unsure of how these transmissions breached the Faraday cage surrounding the Dead Hand, and were unable to prevent what happened next. Hearing what it could only assume was a genuine declaration of war, the manifestation of the SCP-1984-01 entity happened immediately after Reagan's words reached its containment cell. This time, the entity appeared as a semi-transparent woman, withered and blue, wearing traditional Pashtun dress. Armed personnel guarding SCP-1984's cage engaged the entity, causing it to retaliate, lashing out and attacking any that stood in its way. One captain and 2 privates that suffered the brunt of SCP-1984's offensive capabilities began bleeding heavily from their ears, seizing violently. Most gruesomely of all, a liquid leaked from their eyes and nose believed to have been cerebrospinal fluid. While armed personnel attempted to use microwave-emitting weaponry to slow the entity down, the Information Control Team was frantically trying to record a new falsified broadcast, in the hopes that SCP-1984 would cease its hostilities and the entity would dissipate before it was able to travel at high speed to any nearby Soviet nuclear facilities and begin bombarding the United States. Their first attempt to record a new broadcast that would result in a cessation of SCP-1984's slaughter of its guards was interrupted when a nearby wall collapsed. Desperate to recontain the creature, the Information Control Team tried to film the broadcast a second time and succeeded, although one of the actors portraying a newsreader suffered a stroke and had to be edited out to convince the Dead Hand of its supposed authenticity. What followed was a short news clip clarifying that Russia's Politburo was in on President Reagan's joke, including old footage of the USSR's General Secretary Konstantin Chernenko, confirming that the Soviet Union's nuclear forces were not on high alert. Miraculously, after 15 more minutes of sustained fighting with guards, SCP-1984's physical manifestation began to disappear, gradually dematerializing while it seemed to attack with far less intensity. Eventually, containment was reestablished, at the cost of the deaths of 17 members of Foundation staff,
both guards and researchers. A further 8, however, suffered traumatic brain injuries that left them all permanently disabled. The one upside is that this incident remains the only time SCP-1984 has ever breached its containment and caused harm to others. And considering that it could very well have launched Russia's nuclear arsenal, the casualties could easily have been much higher. So remember, folks, don't joke about nuclear weapons, especially if you're the president. You never know what anomalies lurking in the bodies of dead Russian soldiers might be listening. And if they are, you'd better hope they have a sense of humor. Now check out SCP-001, the Scarlet King, and SCP-2935 O Death for more anomalies that could destroy the world.